I call to order the regular meeting of the Anchorage Assembly for the Municipality of Anchorage for June 4th, 2013. Madam Clerk, would you please do the roll call?
Mr. Trainee.
Here.
Mr. Honeman.
Here.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Honored to be here.
Mr. Hall.
Here.
Ms. Johnston. Here. Mr. Starr.
Here.
Mr. Trombley.
Here.
Mr. Flynn. Present. Mr. Birch.
Here.
Mr. Steele.
Here.
Ms. Demboski.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Birch, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Birch. Mr. Mayor, we're ready for your report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple things. I'm not sure if the Assembly received a copy, and if you are interested, we can certainly make more available, but the draft environmental impact statement for the relocation of the 18th Aggressor Squadron from Eielson down here to J-Bear is now published. There will be public comment periods forthcoming on this. Some of the statistics that have come out of the draft EIS show that transferring to J-Bear would be 542 active personnel, 308 students, and 350 other family members, so over 1,000 new residents in our community. There's still obviously some concerns. I think the analysis showed there'd probably be about 150 personnel for whom housing would be challenging because the housing stock that is available could meet some of the needs, but not all of it, because but for about 150 personnel, the housing stock available does not meet the Elmendorf housing requirements. So that's a challenge still to be remained. I think the school district, I heard on the news the other day that, I can't remember who it was from the school board, said that absorbing the 308 students they didn't think would be as big a challenge. So again, for those of you, particularly the folks who represent downtown and East Anchorage, it's certainly worth noting there is a public hearing coming forth. It's going to be at Clark Middle School, and I do have that. I don't know if I brought that date with me, but it's, I think, towards the end of June, so there's time for anyone who wants to participate to certainly find the date and weigh in. Secondly, I think some of you may have heard me announce that we are forming an Olympic Exploratory Committee to look at the possibility of Anchorage submitting a bid for the 2026 Olympics. In 2026, it will have been over 30 years since we were the U.S. choice to bid on the Games, both in 92 and 94. And I'd like to think that 20 years after the U.S. Olympic Committee thought we were a fine selection, that 30 years hence we'd probably be an even greater selection choice, and something that could truly mark us as a great international city. But it really is just exploratory. We want to review the information that came out of the bids from 20 years ago and do an analysis of our facilities and our capabilities and just see whether or not it's even worth pursuing going forward. So very, very preliminary, but something that we're already starting to get a lot of response on for folks who want to serve on the committee. So if you know any of your constituents who might be interested, just have them contact the mayor's office where we're collecting names. And finally, both our police and fire academies are proceeding along. The fire academy had over 1,000 applicants. I think we've got 21 who have made the cut so far into the academy. Police academy, over 700 applicants. I think we've got 15 as of a couple days ago. The numbers may have gone up, but for both academies, we want 28 people in the academy, so we're getting there. So that's it, Mr. Chair. Oh, one other thing, with the chair's indulgence, I've asked the chair for some time during the appearance request after Mr. Young appears. We do have a mayoral proclamation that we were supposed to issue to the recipient several days ago in the mayor's office, but the timing didn't work out. So with the indulgence of the body, we can do it here. And even though it's a mayoral proclamation, I'd like to think that we'll all share in it because it's an accolade for one of our residents who achieved something spectacular. So.
Very good, Mr. Mayor, and we do intend to extend that courtesy to you immediately following our public appearance request this evening.
Thank you.
The chair has no report. We will move into our committee reports, beginning with Mr. Birch.
Just say that the AMATS committee met here a
couple weeks back, and I think basically I'm trying to think of where we're at. We've got a kind of a slow summer here, but we're moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dembowski.
Mr. Chairman, by way of disclosure, tonight we have item 9B10 concerning the state pass-through grant to AFD, and item 9D6, repair of Medic 9 ambulance. I have no financial interest to disclose. As we know, I'm married to an Anchorage firefighter. Also, you will see my name as a community council president in October 2012 in regards to the handouts for item 14H, attesting to the community council support for Title 21 rewrite of Chapter 10. I'm confident that I can act in the public interest on these items. I make the disclosures so you and the Assembly can rule on any potential conflict for me on these items.
Thank you, Amy, for your continued diligence. We appreciate the disclosure. As with other items of this nature, I recognize no conflict for you, and I ask if the Assembly concurs with me. Seeing no opposition, Ms. Dembowski, you shall participate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Steele, it's good to see you.
No report today.
Mr. Starr.
I have no report, but I do have a couple formal requests. One of them originated by me and then several others from the body, and I guess this is directed to the administration. I could use some information for an upcoming Budget and Finance Committee meeting on 3 items. One of them would be a reconciliation summary of the USS Anchorage contribution in the program for that porting. It's been noted, of course, in some emails that the event was significantly shorter than the appropriation. So if we could bring a summary statement and perhaps any credits that were due back to the municipality, that would be helpful. The second one is a summary of the upcoming renewal of the contract for the WIC program. The proposal, I believe, is out there from the conversations we had some time back. I believe about 9 months ago, we were going to get a summary before the new contract was brought forth. We were going to get a summary of operating expenses versus the grant dollars. I'd like to have a formal presentation at a Budget and Finance Committee meeting. And then thirdly is a summary of the overall accounting expenses to date for the SAP program. And I ran this by CFO Mahoney this morning, and she indicated there wasn't too much challenge in kind of giving us a summary of an overall costing report to date. Probably not looking at forecasts or expectations, perhaps, but the summary and the alignment of the budget to actuals and some of that enlightening information. So with those 3 items, I guess, Mr. Mayor, what would your timeline be on a requirement to be able to tender to us those items?
When's your meeting?
I haven't scheduled it based on your answer.
The information on your last item is readily available. The information on WIC is readily available. The information on the USS Anchorage, since that was handled by the independent commission, I'm not sure whether they've done their final audit or not yet. So I'll get that to you, and we can set a date then.
Yeah, I don't have to publicly notice it tonight, but I will put out a public notice to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting in short order. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Traney, my apologies. I saw you in the queue earlier, and I lost you. Did you have?
It was me.
You have a question of the mayor?
Mayor, I had a question on the F-16 study that you've got. Can you make that available to me? I'd like to see it. If it's on CD, I'd appreciate that. Because this body took a position opposed to that a while back. W.O. Sander brought it in. And I think what we need to do is I'd rather keep the F-16 unit in Alaska. It would be nice if it could stay where it's at now, but if it's got to move, I want to make sure it comes here to Anchorage, sir, and I want to read that report.
Yeah, absolutely. The alternatives that are presented in the draft EIS don't anticipate it moving anywhere out of Alaska. There's 2 options and then a third option, which is do nothing. So, but all of them remain in Alaska. And I've got a copy, and there's a CD, and I think we can get the clerk probably to make copies for everyone.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it, Mayor.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
My apologies, Mr. Traney.
Thank you.
Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real briefly, as Mr. Birch indicated, things are pretty quiet at AMATS at the moment. However, I would like to extend my thanks to Mr. Steele for filling in for me for the meeting and for you for appointing him as our alternate so that we can ensure we have full representation from the Assembly when either Mr. Birch or I have to be away. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Trombley.
No report.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not an audit report, but just as a reminder, in 2011, there was an E911 surcharge audit done, and I talked about making some revisions to the code on that, and I plan to do that. Haven't forgotten by no means. In addition to that, there's the 2012 Police and Fire Retirement Medical audit. From that audit resulted in an ad hoc committee, and we haven't met yet, and the only reason why we haven't was because folks have been tied up with SAP or SAP. But that's still on my agenda, and I just wanted to remind folks and let them know that that's still on my agenda. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gray Jackson. Mr. Honeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Public Safety Committee did meet, reference several items in the community's interest, and one being the taxi issue of taxi cabs and availability. And as you know, we had the Title 11 rewrite ordinance that's before us, and I believe comes back before this body in July 23rd. I would expect some major revisions, and we're working, currently last week met with several parties and taxi permit owners, CHAR, Downtown Partnership, Easy Park. A member of the Traffic Engineering Department was there as well, trying to work on at least the focused area that we have been discussing in the downtown after normal business hours, but for the establishments that are in the downtown area. Most of that centered on availability and cab stands. And so we're working on that, and we're splintered into a smaller working committee. Again, some members of the represented agencies that I just mentioned earlier. So with that said, we'll be having our Public Safety Committee meeting. It's been moved to the third Wednesday due to availability of the room. So the third Wednesday, which is June 19th at noon here, either in the conference room or if it's a larger crowd, likely we'll move into the Assembly chambers. It'll be posted clearly on the doors as we walk in, but definitely here at the SLUSAC Library. And beyond that, looking forward to working on not only the taxis, but also towing, the two T's, if you will. And we expect to see something before this body in July as well, reference both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman. Mr. Starr.
To Mr. Honeman, through the chair, it's been brought to my attention that we have engaged in some, perhaps some training tapes and some training videos of our 911 emergency calls as it relates to EMS and the dispatch thereof, where we're actually out on live calls filming the employees in action. Would it be possible to sort of adopt that topic as to what other communities are doing? And I believe it would be appropriate to have a policy statement generated from this body ultimately. So is that task doable by the Public Safety Committee to get your arms around that?
It is, and actually had an offline conversation with Chief Bashut just before the meeting started, and made him aware of the concern from the body and members of the body, and then what discussions we need to proceed with, and then what approach the body might want. And we'll definitely look through that, as well as have hopefully a presentation from the medical director. And to my understanding, I'm not sure if it's been done anywhere else in the U.S., but at least in the field. Maybe perhaps when they're in our medic rigs or when they're in the hospital. But
sure. Well, I appreciate the committee approach from that perspective. Then we don't all have to go over there and dig around in the topic. But ultimately, I believe it to be a policy statement from this body, either a directive or a strong resolution.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Birch.
Yeah, just to follow up on the towing matter before the Public Safety Committee, I've had a call, as I'm sure a number of us have heard from constituents regarding towing and vis-a-vis what the level of engagement the Assembly is and the municipality has with towing. Basically, we have no engagement other than just monitoring it, so there's no real cap on that. And I would encourage the Public Safety Committee, if that's the appropriate venue, in taking a look at this to we really need to focus on what are those costs, because I mean we've had constituents contact us and they're having $400 or $500 charges just for a matter of hours, and there's an expectation out there that the city has got some involvement in that, and actually all we do is monitor it. We don't really control or constrain those limits. So I just, through the chair, encourage the Public Safety Committee to address that. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Birch. We certainly are, and that's why I say the two T's, the towing. And I expect to see something, hopefully, before the body for a revision to the AO regarding non-consensual tows from a private person lot, non-governmental, that sort of thing.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. In July.
Mr. Trainee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The problem with the towing right now is all they have to do is send their towing rates to Kirk's office, and it's posted there. We have no control over what they post, and they could post anything as ridiculous as they want. And when people are said, who's doing this, who's running this, they give it the phone number for our Kirk's office, and they don't. All they do is a repository of the sheet that says what they're going to charge. And so we've definitely got to get control on this towing, because we're all getting the same emails from people being abused. They leave their car somewhere for 3 hours, then $325 later they get it the next day. So that's something that public safety is going to definitely look at, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Trombley?
Hate to tie this up with towing, but through the chair, Mr. Honeman. I did read through the towing aspect, and it says city code says that the rates have to be reasonable. Now, I'm on a board with a bunch of lawyers for the state, and we had a 45-minute conversation about the definition of reasonable. But is that something that you guys are looking at as far as what is the reasonable rate?
That's correct. What it is, and I'll have to give it to him offline as far as information, but the Ombudsman's Office recently has helped me put out a spreadsheet of all the tow companies that have posted their rates to operate in the municipality. And as Mr. Trainee said earlier, that's all the requirement says, and when someone challenges what is reasonable right now, currently as it stands, they must go before the municipal or to the state courts to file what isn't, to challenge reasonable. But we're working on tightening that up and changing some language.
I've got to tell you, Mr. Trombley, inquiring minds want to know, after that 45-minute discussion, did you end up with the definition of reasonable?
There's about 8 lawyers, and they all had a different opinion.
Imagine that.
Imagine. Ms. Johnston?
Yes, thank you. The Enterprise Committee met twice in the last 2 weeks. One was with the members of the Port Commission discussing future plans for the port and the resolution introduced 2 weeks ago by Mr. Flynn and myself. Our meeting was productive, and we discussed the third-party project manager, business, maintenance, and communication plans, in addition to a third-party engineer audit. It was a productive meeting. I think we all agreed we need to continue a very open, inclusive communication program to further develop this most important statewide asset. And you'll see some of this in our resolution in 11B1. Our second meeting was last Friday to discuss the future of solid waste service collections. Cash earned from operations does not cover the needed capital program, and solid waste service will be losing funds by 2015, and if not earlier. The administration laid out 3 options: raising rates, having a 5-year lease for collection program. This is something that's being done in the lower 48, or sell the collections. The committee discussed evaluation done by Mako Strategies with the consultant, and I think each of you received his bio via email, and asked the administration to further research all 3 options and come back to the committee and the Assembly with the results in a month. Thank you.
Ms. Gray-Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Johnston, I apologize that I wasn't there, but I was out of state. But what was this discussion concerning managed competition? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That was part of the discussion, but all of this was very preliminary. I think if the city looked at a 5-year lease, then that might be through managed competition. So we've got 3 different options, but this is all very, very preliminary. So that's why we've asked the administration to go back and get further information. The only thing that really is obvious is that we need to do something. We can't maintain the status quo as it is.
Thank you.
Mr. Trainee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the chair to the administration, a couple of years ago we had an C-17 that crashed at Elmendorf. We lost some people in that, but one of the widows came to me and was really upset about losing her house. So we did was rewrite legislation and submitted it 2 years ago to the voters, and 80% approved it, to give the remaining spouses, a break on their taxes. And now the governor just signed it, so it goes into effect. But the way we wrote it is it goes into effect in January of next year. So, Mr. Mayor, can we have your administration come up with a procedure to implement this between now and next year when it takes effect, so that the widows and widowers out there that might qualify for this property tax exemption would know who they could go to get the paperwork, sir?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. We're now to the addendum to the agenda, plus one laid on the table. The chair would take a motion to incorporate.
Move to incorporate.
Second.
Okay, any objection? Seeing, hearing none, I will read the addendum to the agenda into the minutes. We have item 9C3, AM number 337, recommendation of award to Marine Holdings Company for the POL-2 cathodic protection and enhancement for the municipality of Anchorage. We have 9C4, AM number 338, and that's the Toilsome Hill, Glen Alps Road and Canyon Road improvements in the Glen Alps Road paving. And we have 9D11, AM 339, and that is a sole source contract for project management for the Enterprise Resource Planning Application Project. We have 9D12, AM number 340, and that's recommendation to award various carriers providing property and excess insurance coverage to the municipality of Anchorage. We have 9E15 under information and reports, AM 58, the 2013 first quarter spending report for the utility and enterprise departments. We have 911B1, resolution number 121S, and the support of third-party project management services to focus on the business needs of the Port of Anchorage while the intermodal expansion project remains ongoing. And our one laid on the table tonight is 9B12. It has no AR number, but it's a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly stating its conditional protest regarding transfer of ownership and DBA name change for the Office Cocktail Lounge beverage dispensary liquor license number 806. That is our items. I would now be receptive to a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Move to approve.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I do want to pull Ken Stout's award if we could.
we'll pull those in just a moment,
Okay.
Mr.
Thank you, sir.
Trainee. So I've got a motion and a second on the consent agenda as amended. Items to be pulled. Mr. Trainee, I'll begin with you this evening.
9E3, sir.
9E3.
9E3 on the, sorry, 9A3. Got to get better glasses. And on page 5, 9E1, information report.
Okay, I show you're pulling 9A3 and E1.
E1. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Johnston.
9A1. Thank you.
9A1. Mr. Honeman.
For the late on the table, 9 Bravo 12, as well as to the addendum 9 Delta 11.
Nine B12 and 9D11.
That's correct.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to pull 9 Apple 2. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That was 9 Echo 2.
9 Apple 2.
Apple. Thank you, Ms. Gray Jackson. Mr. Trombley.
9 Bravo 3. 9 Charlie 1 for conflict of interest. And 9 Delta 3. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Flynn.
Nothing, Mr. Chairman. However, I would appreciate, prior to our approving the consent agenda, an explanation of the difference between 9 Delta 3 and 9 Delta 12 delay. So when we get, so prior to approval, I'd like that explanation so that
Yes.
we have something on the table.
Mr. Trombley? Okay. Mr. Starr?
9 Echo 6 and 9 Foxtrot 3. Foxtrot 3 only to discuss the schedule of the public hearing time. Thank you.
Mr. Steele?
I don't have anything that's not already full.
Thank you. Ms. Dembowski?
No items.
Mr. Birch?
No items.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I forgot one. Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for reminding me. I'd like to pull 9 Bravo 11 because there are some blanks in the resolution, and also I have an amendment to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Which one? It's pulled. Mr. Honeman?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm not sure, did I hear if 9 Delta 3 got pulled? If not,
Yes, it did.
Yes, it
Okay,
did.
thank you.
Okay. Let me run down what we have pulled for this evening. We have 9A 1, 2, and 3. I have 9B 3, 11, and 12. 9C 1, 9D 3, and 11. I have 9E 1 and 6, and I have 9F 3. Did I miss anyone?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, if I could you scratch off 9 Bravo 3? I made a mistake on that one.
Okay, and Mr. Horneman, did you ask about 9D3?
Delta, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Pull that one. Okay, Mr. Trombley, would you like to explain to Mr. Flynn in regards to D3 and
B12?
and B12?
Well, actually, I'd like to have the Chief Mew come up and explain what happened with the office cocktail lounge, and that would help explain a little bit as to why we're going with the AR, and we're gonna I'm gonna move to postpone indefinitely 9 Delta 3.
Let me see. Mr. Wheeler, would you like to speak here?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think Mr. Flynn's question goes to the two different items. The AM is a vehicle for approval, but you need a resolution for protest under the code. That's why you have two different documents. If and when the Assembly takes the resolution and makes the motion, at that time the Chief is prepared to come up and speak to the issue.
Are you okay with that, Mr. Flynn? Very good. Ms. Gray Jackson, I'm showing you in the queue. That's fine. Okay, with no other items to be approved, vote on approving the consent agenda lest the items pulled. Motion carries unanimously. We now have before us item 9A1.
Move to approve.
Any objection?
I just asked that my name be removed from the resolution. I just like the opportunity to vote on it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Anyone else? Seeing no objection, that item is approved. Who's reading?
This is a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing Alaska Pride Fest 2013 and encouraging the Anchorage community to celebrate the diversity of the state of Alaska. Whereas Alaska Pride Fest is sponsored each year by Identity, an umbrella organization that provides a full range of community services as an Alaskan 501c3 nonprofit organization. And whereas Alaska Pride Fest 2013 is a week-long celebration from June 8th through June 16th of Alaska's diversity of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community's journey through our state of pride, which is the theme of this year's celebration. And whereas Alaska Pride Fest 2013 will share its celebration with the Anchorage community on Saturday, June 15th, beginning with the dancing in the streets at 11 a.m. on 4th Avenue and L Street in front of the Snow City Cafe, which culminates in an outdoor festival from noon to 5 p.m. on the Delaney Park Strip. And whereas the first LGBT Pride celebration in support of gay rights began more than 40 years ago on the First Avenue anniversary of the Stonewall riots, the event regarded by many as the catalyst for the LGBT movement for civil rights in the United States. And whereas to commemorate events that took place at the Stonewall Inn during June of 1969, the month of June has been declared Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Pride Month and made official annually by proclamation of the President Barack Obama, who called upon the people of the United States to eliminate prejudice everywhere it exists and to celebrate the great diversity of the American people. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly recognizes June 8th through 16th, 2013 as Alaska Pride Fest 2013 and encourages the Anchorage community to join in celebrating Alaska diversity, passed and approved by Anchorage Assembly this 4th day of June 2013.
We now have before us item A2.
I'd like to move item A2.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any objection? Seeing, hearing none, that item is approved. Mr. Steele?
This is a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly recognizing June 15th, 2013 as Juneteenth Day in Alaska. Whereas Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the end of slavery in the United States, and whereas Juneteenth Day recognizes June 19th, 1865, when Union soldiers arrived in Galveston, Texas, to announce the war's end, and that all slaves were free in accordance with the executive order of President Abraham Lincoln. And whereas it took nearly 2.5 years after President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation for word to reach the last group of slaves that they were in fact free men and women. And whereas the Alaska State 22nd Legislature passed HB 100 in 2001, establishing the third Saturday in June each year to commemorate the abolition of slavery and to reflect on the suffering and sacrifice endured by millions of early African Americans and to appreciate the unique freedom and equity enjoyed by all state citizens. And whereas the third celebration is the 3-day celebration is planned for the Delaney Park Strip, starting with a family day on Friday, June 14th, 2013, and continuing the celebration with live performances from Detroit's Dave Hamilton Band, games with prizes, and contests for all. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly recognizes June 15th, 2013 as Juneteenth Day and encourages Anchorage community to participate in local events to celebrate African American freedom, heritage, and contributions of to our American culture. Passed this June 4th, 2013 by the Anchorage Assembly.
I want to thank you all for this award and invite you all to come out on Family Day. And also we're doing a special thing on Sunday. It's going to be a tribute to God the Father on Father's Day. And we have quite a bit of day planned and performances and other things that will be of interest to everybody. So thank you again. And Ms. Wanda?
Assembly members, I just very pleased to get this. Thank you. Again, thank you, and I hope that you do join Juneteenth out on the park strip. It's going to be a real fun time.
Thank you both. We've got a couple of comments. I do need to point out and apologize. Our microphone is not working this evening, so if you come to the microphone, just speak loudly. And but we heard you just fine. Mr. Honeman.
Well, I wanted to say thank you for putting together and orchestrating the celebration for Juneteenth in Alaska, and particularly here in Anchorage. And unfortunately, I won't be there on Friday or Saturday, but I'm hoping to be back. Get my grandsons in town. We're going to be camping, so I'm hoping to be back in time to be there by the weekend. So we'll see how it goes on. But thank you so much for all your work.
Sunday starts from 2 p.m. until 8 p.m.
Very
so
good.
We'll be there.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
In just a moment. Ms. Gray Jackson, were you in the queue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I look forward to Juneteenth and every other celebration, cultural celebration in this community every single year, and I'll be there probably on Saturday. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Trombley.
I had the opportunity, and I just got done reading the biography on Frederick Douglass, and the courage that it took him to escape to New York, and when he was a slave, is that the owner's actually wife taught him how to read, and it was amazing to read his story and the courage that he had, and help pave the way to where we are today. So keep moving forward, and thank you guys for all you do.
And there is on the Frederick Douglass, we do have information we're being passing out. Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and
It doesn't work. It doesn't matter.
yeah, but we do have some more information regarding that, and also the church history of Frederick Douglass and Sojourner
Oh,
Truth.
that'd be very helpful, because when you read a biography, you generally only get that author's information, but there's always so much more. So, but I look forward to reading as much as I can. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have before us item A3.
Move to approve AR 2013-147.
Any objection? Seeing, hearing none, that item is approved. Mr. Honeman, you're reading?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Anchorage Resolution number 2013-147, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly honoring and remembering Ken Stout for his unwavering dedication and service to the community, the state, and our country. Whereas on May 1st, 2013, Anchorage lost one of its finest residents with the passing of Ken Stout, retired Army officer, Alaska Methodist University professor, and business manager, former Anchorage Assembly member, Eastside, and longtime residents whose life and distinguished career have benefited our community, our state, and our country. And whereas, born in Wheatland, Missouri, Ken Stout enlisted in the Army just prior to the Korean conflict and served our country for 27 years in peace and in war, receiving 2 Bronze Stars for valor, 3 Legion of Merits, the Vietnamese Gallantry Cross with Silver Stars, and the Vietnamese Medal of Honor in combat, before retiring as a lieutenant colonel in 1974. And whereas married since 1952, Ken and wife Peggy Ann have 2 daughters, Linda and Dee Dee. Having come to Alaska in 1971 with Ken Stout's assignment to Fort Richardson, Ken and Peg Stout chose Alaska as their permanent home, as did daughter Dee Dee Johnroe. And whereas Ken Stout's commitment to our community and our state is manifest in his service as a board member of the Alaska State Housing Authority, providing oversight for the development and construction of low-income and senior housing. His work with the Veterans Administration Advisory National Committee on Readjustment of Veterans and the Disabled Veterans Association, and his support of shelters for the homeless, such as the Anchorage Gospel Rescue Mission. And whereas Ken Stout's political service includes state chair of the Republican Party of Alaska from 1980 to 1985, service on President Reagan's transition team in 1980, and his 3-year term on the Assembly from 2004 to 2007. And whereas Ken Stout is the father of the present Anchorage Code of Ethics, having sponsored the Ethics Code rewrite, approved unanimously by the Assembly in 2007 to include disclosure and conflict management reforms. Ken Stout and the Board of Ethics support it. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly recognizes and honors Kenneth Oliver Stout for his commitment to our community, our state, and our country, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 4th day of June, 2013.
Yes, I would assume. Ron, would you turn that microphone on?
Thank you. I'll let Dee Dee do the rest of the talking.
Caught me by surprise as well, but I really do appreciate you guys recognizing Dad was very committed to this community, and he was a consensus maker. I was impressed. He's taught me a lot. I just can't hardly believe that I wake up and he's still not there, but Mama is, and for you guys to acknowledge what Dad did, for Mom to get the accolades, I'm very, very appreciative. Thank you very much.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dee Dee and Peg, I just want to let you know, in case you don't, that Kim was one of my 42, that I call my 42 because I worked with 42 different Assembly members throughout my 18 years working for the Assembly, and I admired him. And in 2005, when my position was eliminated, he stepped right up to the table and he gave me my first letter of recommendation. And I will never forget that. Never. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome. Mr. Horniman.
And again, I've known your dad, your husband, briefly through our limited contacts within the community, but always known him to be, as you say, a consensus builder and maker, and just nothing less than a fine gentleman. And I do appreciate his many years of service, not only to our nation, our state, and of course, then to our local community. So I know you'll miss him way more than we'll ever. But at the same time, it's a big void to fill, and certainly he fulfilled East Side and did represent it very well. So thank you so much.
Mayor Sullivan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Serving with Ken taught me so much. I've never met a finer gentleman in my whole life. And during contentious Assembly issues, he was just that calm port in the storm. He'd seen a lot in his career, and he just knew how to work with people and find consensus. And his work on the Ethics Code was really monumental work. And I knew him obviously many years before serving together, but really got to know him when serving on the Assembly. And as you get past the layers of a human being and find out what their core values are, again, I've never met a finer person. So we'll all miss him. Thank you.
Mr. Training.
Dee Dee and Peg, thanks for letting us work with him. He is a good man. I've served with a lot of Assembly members. Ken was the best I'd worked with, so thank you very much for letting him spend his time here with us. I appreciated everything you did. Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Trombley.
2 words to describe your husband and your father was very kind and gentle, and that was one of the things that I noticed about him. And he'll be missed, but I'm glad that you guys could be here to accept this. So we're honored.
Peg, Dee Dee, I don't know that you're even aware, but when Ken decided that he was going to actually run for the Assembly, it's a pretty big deal when you announce that at your Rotary Club. And Ken gave me the honor of being the one that stood up and made the announcement and introduced him at our club that he was going to be a candidate for the Anchorage Assembly. I never served with him, but I've known him through Rotary forever. And if ever there's an individual that deserved the title of being a gentleman, it was your husband and your dad. Thank you.
It's very humbling to hear everything that everybody, pardon me, that everybody has said tonight. It makes it a little easier. Thank you again.
Thank you. We now have before us item 9B11, AR number 146, inviting and providing for the participation of a Citizens Task Force to advise and assist the Assembly in its development of procedures governing the Assembly's conduct of public hearings open to the testimony from members of the public.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay. Any objection? Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is an amendment that I'd like to make, and if you don't have it, that's okay. I can do it. Okay. I'll make sure the clerk gets a copy of the amendment. But anyway, on line 40, on page 1, line 42, after Alaska Center for Public Policy, I'd like to add ACLU. And so I move that amendment.
Second.
Thank you.
We've got a motion and a second. Any objection to the amendment? Seeing and hearing none, that amendment is approved.
And second, Mr. Chairman, on page 2, line 17, the assembly members need to be appointed by the chair, and so that's why there was 3 blank spaces are there. And I know that you've already asked me to serve, and I have accepted honorably. But is it appropriate now that we add the other 2 names, or
Actually,
there's a resolution for action?
what I would like to do, if the body is willing, is have a conversation with individuals rather than putting them on a spot here. But I will do that very quickly.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have that item before us as amended, and we've got a motion on the floor. Please vote. Motion carries unanimously.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Since we're just getting past the recognitions, it looks like the group that, I was going to do the proclamation for is assembled, and we could get that out of the way rather than waiting till after 6, if that's okay with you.
What I will do, Mr. Mayor, if you're good, I don't know that we got anything left here that's going to take time. I'll finish up the consent and then do that one immediately.
Thank you, sir.
We have before us item 9B12, and that is an AR with no number, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly stating its conditional protest regarding transfer of ownership and doing business change for the Office Cocktail Lounge.
Move to approve.
Second.
And we will need a number for the AR, if we could.
We will get a number for it.
Okay, thanks, sir. And I know, thank you, Mr. Trombley, for working with the Assembly Council reference and his municipal attorney. And this is, I believe, the time we could discuss a little about what 9D3 as well as it pertains to.
Is there, I'm sorry. I was just, is there a way to combine the two since they are linked instead of having to go through the process and come with that later?
I'd move that we merge the two or combine for purpose of discussion and approval.
Second.
Any objection? Okay, Mr. Horniman.
Well, it came to our attention, Mr. Chairman, that real recently that the Office Lounge, a cocktail lounge on East Northern Lights across from the Sears Mall, has a transfer of ownership and name change. And we had that on our agenda as item 9 Delta 3 with approval. There was, if you noted in your packet, a violation, and I'll have to briefly grab that, for serving underage persons, and it was caught by an enforcement action of the Alcohol Beverage and Control Board enforcement officer. And that in and of itself over a 2-year period wouldn't stand as an issue where we would automatically object or protest the transfer. But what has recently came to our attention, of course, on June 2nd, there was a rather violent act, shooting, a large disturbance and injury to a person or persons there in the area of the office lounge. And so with that, I know Mr. Trombley, you and I had a brief conversation, Mr. Chairman, just this last day or two, and I'm glad to see that we were able to move this with the municipal attorney. We had only until June 7th to issue a protest of this transfer in order to get, if you will, a vehicle of the licensee, the applicants to come before this body, perhaps to consider discussions, what happened and what are they doing that perhaps might have led to this, or what are they intend to do to prevent further problems and concerns. So this is the reason for 9B12 to issue our temporary protest or conditional protest.
Very good.
In this way. And I believe we have the chief has been reviewing perhaps some calls for service. Is it appropriate to call the chief to actually discuss maybe just
that would be fine.
If Chief Mew, if it's possible, I know you were doing some diligence there, looking through some files and such. And I guess to start with, do you know of any other actions or calls for service to this location or near this location regarding this particular establishment?
Chief, if you could you use this microphone over there? This one isn't working. Thank you.
So, Chair Hall and Assemblyman Honeman, hold this. I wasn't reviewing the calls for service, so I can't answer that question directly. What I was looking at was the first several police reports on the shooting to give you what information I could about the bar itself and how things were working that night for your consideration. I can look into your other question for you as well.
We'll likely need that for our Public Safety Committee, so I'll follow up with a written request, but I thank you, Chief. I didn't know if you had that information available. As to the shooting, is there a synopsis issue about...
There's a few things I can say. I have to be very careful here because this is an open investigation and a serious one, and I'm certain the DA does not want me to go into a lot of investigative details at this point in time. But what I can tell you is we got a call from multiple callers at once, essentially 20 or more people fighting, both inside the bar and outside the bar, multiple shots fired, several vehicles struck, one man struck. It was, sort of out of control. Security was being overwhelmed by the crowd. It's unclear to me from the initial reports whether there were multiple shots from one weapon or whether there were multiple weapons. The officers arrived. They started doing first aid on the injured person. There were several small fights going on outside. The officers had to arrest several people, or at least handcuff them and detain them, including a scuffle with security people. We weren't scuffling with security. Security was scuffling with people. We've talked to management there. We found them to not be particularly cooperative. Witnesses told us that the situation at the bar had been getting progressively more rowdy all night long before this fight broke out. And I think I'm probably on safe grounds there. I don't know if I should go into details further about the actual shooting and how it transpired.
That'll be adequate, Chief. Thank you.
Good synopsis, Chief. Thank you very much.
Anything else, Mr. Horniman?
Yes, I know we're under 9B Bravo 12, and we had 9D3 as for purpose of discussion. So there'll be two separate motions. I can take up 9D3 later, or we can do it now, as you want.
Actually, we got a motion on the floor on 9
Bravo 12.
Bravo 12.
Move to refer this to committee, Public Safety Committee for review.
Second.
Okay. Any objection?
I object, Mr. Chairman. We have until June 5th to file our conditional protest. We need to approve this tonight and then take it up under consideration at a later date. I mean, it's okay for the public.
No, I agree. We could approve this, AR, and then move the matter to the Public Safety Committee.
To the committee.
Public Safety Committee can do anything it wants. We need to approve this now.
And I agree.
Good point, Mr. Flynn.
Mr. Wheeler, is that what you wanted to say?
Through the chair, close. Passage of the resolution includes a conditional protest being filed with the ABC Board and a referral to the Public Safety Committee. But I agree with Mr. Flynn that this should be passed tonight, not referred.
And I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Urge approval, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Ma'am, there's no testimony on this.
Move to approve.
Okay. Please vote. As soon as I can get it. Motion carries unanimously, and I will refer that to the Public Safety Committee. We now have before us item 9D3, Mr. Horniman.
Move to postpone indefinitely.
Second.
Okay. Any objection to that? Seeing, hearing none, that 9D3 is postponed indefinitely. We now have before us item 9C1, and give me just a moment.
I'll make the motion to approve because I think Mr. Trombley needs to state a possible conflict of interest.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Trombley.
Mr. Chairman, by way of disclosure, tonight we have item 9C1 concerning bid award on the Burgaw Rica Drive Water Sewer Rehabilitation Contract to BC Excavating LLC. This contract was competitively bid as an AWW project. I have no financial interest in the bidder or the contract proceeds. I disclose my ownership of a rental unit on Rica Drive within the area of this project. I make this disclosure to you. I make this disclosure so you and the Assembly can rule on any potential conflict.
Thank you, Adam. We appreciate the disclosure. As you referenced, this project is an AWWU project and was competitively bid. You have no financial interest in the bidder or contract proceeds. Replacement and restoration of sewer and water mains are routine matters of health and safety to benefit the larger community, not just your rental unit. You, your tenant, and the rental unit have no role and no financial interest in the outcome of this procurement. I recognize no conflict for you to participate in approval of the bid award. Does the Assembly concur? Seeing no opposition, Mr. Trombley, you shall participate. And we have that before us with a second. No discussion. Please vote. That motion carries unanimously. We now have before us item 9D11, Assembly Memorandum 339, and that is a sole source contract to provide project management for the Enterprise Resource Planning Application Project.
Move to accept.
Second.
Approve.
Mr. Horniman?
To the administration, I've asked, and I think Ms. Mahoney, you were out and not in attendance the last meeting. I believe you were out of town, perhaps not available. Repeatedly have had some concerns about a growing number, and I know Mr. Starr had talked about perhaps before the Budget Committee having a review or even a work session. I'm just concerned we're now another $500,000 on the contract, and so I'm just concerned. I don't know. Do we have an end game or an end date or something? I mean, it seems like we're just keep throwing money into a hole. And I recognize that there are some things that are unanticipated, but is there specifics more than single-page document both sides that we can get?
Through the chair, Mr. Honeman, these expenditures were approved by you when we requested additional funding for the SAP budget through the first quarter budget process. And we had asked for additional funding to support the project, and this is simply a contract that is within the budget of what you previously approved. However, I recognize your point in that you maybe what we should do in these going forward is we could put a line item on there that indicates that this contract has already been approved, and then that way you would know whether we are still inside our budget.
Yeah, that would be very helpful, because I'm concerned that, we're basically authorizing $492,000, and if I'm having difficulty chasing it down, I'm sure the public is, and I know I've had several queries as to, what's the end date and what's the final cost, and, are we at go live, and I keep trying to explain that it takes time, and please be patient. But my understanding, we're about $3 million over what we originally had thought it would be.
Mr. Honeman, I can give you all of the information that was provided at the work session. We went through all those numbers at that time. Also, Mr. Starr requested an update at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. We can provide them there as well.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Ms. Gray-Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, the contract hasn't been approved yet. We're about to approve the contract. The funding may have been, and I'm reluctant to approve this contract because I've been asking for a follow-up work session on SAP and the Q&A and haven't had it yet, and I understand that it is forthcoming. In addition, I'm going to seize this opportunity because I asked the question at the last meeting, and Kronos and SAP tie into each other, and I asked if the issues with FLSA and Kronos and the fire department were still pending, and no one could answer it, and I was supposed to get a response, and I haven't yet, and it's been several weeks.
Through the chair, who did you ask that question to?
I asked the question at the last meeting, and you were not here, and the mayor said that no one was available to answer the question, and they would get an answer to me, except I haven't seen it yet.
Ms. Jackson, I'm sorry for the delay in you receiving the response. Could you just forward the question to me in writing, and I will ensure that you get a response?
I'll be happy to do that. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. See no one else in the queue, please vote. That motion carries 8-3. We now have before us item E1, which is Federation of Community Councils First Quarter 2013 Report. Mr. Traney.
Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Chairman, I've got a couple of concerns. First, on page 1, the report states the grant agreement was not approved until late February. I wanted to point out that the reason the Assembly did not approve the grant earlier was because the Assembly Chair and the Clerk's Office and the Ombudsman were working with the FCC to address concerns expressed by memberships of this body and the public on that. And so I found in the first page to be interesting when they said it was our fault they didn't get the money. Second, I'm disappointed with the lack of detail in the report relating to what the FCC does for the federations. I want to break down on exactly how many letters were mailed out by the FCC to each community council. I want to know what service they're providing to community councils, because sometimes it seems as if the community councils are servicing the federation. It doesn't work that way. The federation is no different than Kinko's. They're a contract we hired to work with the community councils. I want to make sure that report, when we look at it, tells us exactly what they've done to live up to that mandate of working with the community councils, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Traney. Mr. Starr.
Well, through the chair, I think I'll ask Mr. Honeman, partly because I know he's active in that, but one of the reports, and you can answer this, Mr. Honeman, if you know it. If not, we perhaps can get other information, but we have one of those community service patrols out in the Chugiak and Birchwood area primarily, and it received a state grant. And there was some dialogue that was sent to me that the FCC had some angst about our service patrols because they carried guns. And I wondered if and I was interpreting that the grant and their administering of the grant was refused through the FCC because of our patrols carrying guns. Is that sort of how the dialogue went?
Through the chair, no. Thank you, Mr. Starr, for the question. My recollection, and I've been to 2 of the FCC meetings regarding the issue of community patrollers, some of them wanting to carry a concealed weapon as is required by or permitted by state law. And as you know, there's not much that any local community governing body can do to restrict something that the state has already defined. As to the issue of, in particular, your area, there wasn't a reluctance on the behalf. Well, there was some reluctance discussed, but there was no reluctance on the actual administering of grants that were received by the community patrols by the FCC center manager, Mr. Butler. The concern came about whether or not if the FCC board officers had some liability if they were to knowingly authorize by accepting the grant to administer. That was a period of discussion that was tabled. It was literally a deadlock of all the board members present, and it was tabled. And to my understanding, they have decided not to go forward on any official wording one way or the other because, as Mr. Traney said, it's the community councils, each and every community council that run their own councils and not necessarily the federation that manages. And so it's kind of it was seeming to be getting backwards, and I think they've got the message. One of their board members stepped down as a result of it because they weren't feeling comfortable, and they should have. But I don't think the federation. I think the federation continues to work well.
And to you, Mr. Chairman, I know you go to those FCC gatherings at times. Are they drifting into sort of policy setting and organization? Back in my day as community council president, I felt that was a resource that I could draw on, but are they moving into meetings now of discussion and policy? How would something like whether or not a private entity carries a firearm be an issue that we should have a policy statement from FCC? I'm kind of flummoxed.
No, you're right. I do attend some of those. They're not actually going that way, but that was part of the delay when we rewrote the contract. It would be very explicit that that was no way part of their charge. We cleaned a lot of that detail up when we redid the contract this year.
Great. And I guess along with the lines of Mr. Traney, a little bit more summary of clients served and perhaps the depth and breadth of the Ombudsman structured report. Clients served, emails sent, that sort of stuff would be helpful, as well as attendance reports on some of the meetings that they're organizing. That would be nice. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Trini?
Mr. Starr, I'll be attending from now on behalf of the Assembly. I'll be attending their monthly meetings on the third Wednesday of every month. So I'll give a report as to how they're going. Each community council is its own entity, and they are not representing the city of Anchorage. They're representing that community council. It's a little nebulous issue we're going to have to deal with at some point in time. So if they are armed, the patrols, they're doing that on their own. They are not representing the city of Anchorage in any way, shape, manner, or form. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. No one in the queue, please vote. Motion carries unanimously. We now have before us item 9E6, and that is AM number 49, presentation of the 2012 audited financials for the Anchorage Museum at the Rasmussen Center.
Move to accept.
Second.
Mr. Starr?
Mr. Chairman, I kind of pulled this because we're seeing, again, another level of reports coming out of the CFO's purview that is now giving us information on the operating statements of some of the entities that, in fact, all the entities that the municipality has control over. And I thought it was fascinating reading the amount of data, which has probably always been there, but the way it was packaged for us to review brought to light several aspects. And I don't know that I want to indulge in it now. There was some discussion about bringing it into an expanded discussion of budget and finance, but the lost revenues for the Egan Center are clear in some of the other additional reports. I pulled this one in particular for a focused question, and then also to kind of poll the body whether or not we want to continue these or we should see them and preview them or preview them rather at the Budget and Finance Committee level. But through the chair, my question to the administration perhaps is, in particular to this one, I pulled a museum. I thought in the expansive report somewhere I read that there was a municipal contribution, and I circled it somewhere, but I forgot where I circled it. Do we have a continuing contribution requirement? How much was it this year, and how much will it be next year, and what's the source of those funds?
Through the chair, I believe Mr. Starr is referring to the municipal contribution that is depicted on the Statement of Activities, which is in page 267. And last year, we contributed $4.2 million to the museum. This year, we contributed $4.4 million to the museum. And the source of funds for this is taxpayer funds, and the use of these funds is for normal operating costs for the museum.
Will we anticipate that again next year at that level?
Pardon me?
I'm not familiar with the budget for the operating year of 2013. Are we slated to contribute over the $4 million mark to support that entity?
Yes. Each year, this particular contract increases based on CPI in Anchorage population, so it's comparable to the tax cap increases.
And I asked you this earlier when I spoke to you on the phone. If we decided to establish a policy, perhaps where we provided free access to the entity, the museum asset during the summer months for our tourist population and things like that, would it be possible to put a quantified number on how much it would cost the city to open the doors for free in our prime tourist months?
Well, based on the income statement that I'm reading here, it appears that the museum collects $226,000 in revenues from individuals. So that I think that would really be a question that we would need to take to the museum executive director and make sure that that's what this number really represents.
Could you do that or do I need to further approach that through a resolution statement or that? I'm not talking about perhaps this year, but I mean I would look at a policy statement if it's a contribution of $400,000 for say June and July. It may be goodwill to our tourist market, and in the $4 million mark, we may get back a tremendous amount of advertising.
Sure, you should take it. I don't know.
Mr. Starr, yes, we can look at that.
And what's the mechanism that you would like us to use to explore that policy directive from us?
You just gave it to me. Thank you.
Through the chair, please. I gave you an incorrect number, Mr. Starr.
Say again?
I gave you an incorrect number. I was reading the wrong line on this report.
4.37, wasn't it?
In regard to your questions about individual admissions, it was $1.3 million for the year, not the $200,000 number that I reported earlier.
I guess that's a yearly gate collection, however.
Yes.
Great, thank you. I'd appreciate perhaps a follow-up on if there's any interest in that policy statement. Thank you.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Starr, for commenting on these financial reports that we're getting on these municipal-owned entities. It was really interesting reading, and although a lot of paperwork, I probably would like to see them address at a budget committee meeting. But for those who don't remember, the museum used to be a municipal department, and now it's been operating independently for some time, and it just makes sense, since it is a municipal, continues to be a municipal entity, that the contribution that is being made with tax dollars is very appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Mahoney.
Through the chair, I would just like to point out that these reports were prepared not by the CFO's office, but the municipal manager's office, specifically Debbie Fitzgerald, and she should be commended for doing a good job.
Mr. Starr?
Yeah, through the chair, I was trying to do that, but particularly how they were packaged to us. So however that accolade needs to go out, I thought they were very substantial. You know, it gives us the information on sort of winners and losers of our municipal assets. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Horniman?
Just briefly, even though it wasn't pulled, the one accompanying right behind it referenced Dempsey and Ben Boeke ice arenas. So I'll take the question offline, but to this municipal manager, I understand there's perhaps a difference between the fees that are covered, charged at both Ben Boeke and Dempsey versus Harry McDonald out in Eagle River. So I'd be curious as to know who sets rates and such, because it looks like we're still operating at a loss there. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real briefly, thank you, Ms. Mahoney. And Debbie, thank you very much for these reports. They're very, very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Please vote. That motion passes unanimously. We have one item left under the consent agenda. I'm going to hold that until after I extend the courtesy to the mayor and we have our public appearance for this evening. So, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to read the proclamation, and then I'm going to ask the recipient to join me at the microphone for the presentation, and then her friends can take pictures if they would like. This is a proclamation, Municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, and it reads, whereas Rada Kajanova, formerly a native of Sakhalin, Russia, and a 1988 member of the USSR national ski team, moved to Anchorage in 1993 to attend the University of Alaska and is now a project manager with HDR Engineering. And whereas Rada has continued to ski competitively and returned to national racing after undergoing an ACL replacement and other surgeries in 2006, and she attributes her skiing success to her mother, who taught her to appreciate good sportsmanship and competition. And whereas Rada is a regular downhill racing competitor in master races at Alyeska, and competed in March in the Phillips 66 Masters National Championship in Big Sky, Montana, a U.S. Ski and Snowboard Association event. And whereas with a total of 245 racers competing, Rada received a second place in the Supergiant Slalom, a second place in the Giant Slalom, and a third place in the Slalom, which earned her the overall national champion title on March 18, 2013. Now, therefore, I, Dan Sullivan, and I'm hoping I can assume the Anchorage Assembly, do hereby honor and recognize the achievements of Rada Kajanova and urge all Anchorage citizens to join me in wishing Rada the best snow conditions, the fastest speed, and the very best results in her future downhill racing competitions. Congratulations.
Yes. Our IT professional repaired it.
Anyway, congratulations. Good job.
Thank you very much for taking the time. This is very humbling. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations. We now have before us a request for public appearance from Larry Young in regards to the Anchorage Public Water Supply. Mr. Young, are you here? Come on up, Mr. Young. He's there. Mr. Young, come on up. Apparently, Mr. Young is not here.
No, he's there. He's
Okay.
waiting for the
Clearing
clearance.
for the traffic.
Come on up, Mr. Young.
Ernie, I made a request. I put it in with the clerk last week.
I don't have that one.
You want me to wait to the end of the meeting?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll be back.
Thank you. You'll be back. Okay, if Mr. Young is not here, I'm going to move back to item 9F3, which is
Mr. Chairman, I really just wanted to know about the time. They're looking for a public hearing on the item at the next meeting, and I'm challenged by that time frame, and I'm not sure how or why the request was for the 18th.
Yep.
That's the whole reason.
Ms. Mahoney?
Through the chair, this is our standard practice to introduce and then to have a public hearing 2 weeks later. In this particular situation, we are working on a deal with our banks, and we have it set up such that if the Assembly does approve this, which is financially beneficial to the port, we would be closing the deal on June 21st. And so a June 18th public hearing and hopeful approval from the Assembly would be appreciated.
And to that end, and I'm not trying to debate the topic, but my mind tells me that we currently have a line of credit of $40 million, and this expands it by another 20. Is that the way I read that?
Well, we currently have a commercial paper program of $40 million, and we're switching from a commercial paper program to a short-term loan. The loan is 3 years maximum, 2 years depending on if we would like to continue 3 years. But in today's market, it's more cost advantageous for us to go to a short-term loan program than it is a commercial paper program.
And the amount is going from 40 to 60 million, however, though, for the short term.
We have the capacity for 60 million, but we are only going to use 40 million. And should the port need an additional 20 million, then it would be available for us.
Okay. I guess the request is that I have a a budget advisory committee meeting set up for the 20th, and I may need to move that if there's an interest to sort of debate or a whole work session. I need to get more information than what's attached here.
Okay.
Thank you, but I guess it can stand.
Then I need a motion to introduce.
I'll move to introduce.
Second.
I need a third.
Third.
Okay. That item is introduced. And with that, we're going to break for a short dinner break here, and we will come back and continue the meeting.
14. I'd like to cross that out. What did I say? I'm sorry, 4 words. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. The first 4 letters, or words of line 14, and I have it written down, and I can give it to the clerk, but
You're on page 484, is that correct?
Page 484 of your packet.
All right.
And the reason that is because if you have a chance to read Title VII actually gives the administration, the mayor, the ability to designate who signs contracts. And in this case, that, at least with this administration, that authority has been given to the purchasing director and the deputy director. So what I'm crossing out is because it conflicts with already Title VII. And I'd like to insert the words after Title VII in the most efficient manner. And I have that written up, and I will give that to the clerks.
Second.
Okay. Mr. Starr?
I'm sorry, I was firm before.
Okay. Never mind, Mr. Starr. I have no one in the queue. We've got the amendment before us, a first and a second. Please vote. Okay. Mr. Trombley?
And that's all, Mr. Chairman, unless there's any other comments on the main.
Yeah, and the amendment passes.
I'm sorry.
And now we have the item as amended before us. Seeing no one in the queue, please vote. Motion carries unanimously. We now have before us item 11B, AR number 121, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly in support of third-party project management services to focus on the business needs of the Port of Anchorage while the intermodal expansion project remains ongoing.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the S version.
Second.
Okay, we have the motion to move. Mr. Flynn, do you want to speak to that?
I think we've vetted this appropriately, Mr. Chairman. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Very good. Seeing no one in the queue, no questions, please vote. Motion carries unanimously. We now have before us item 11C, AR number 104, as amended, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly approving an alcoholic beverage conditional use for club use in license number 4959 in the R3 Multiple Family Residential District for the Anchorage Shrine Club, Incorporated. Mr. Trainee?
Mr. Chairman, I want to move a substitute. This would be item 2013-104S1. I've got it here. I'll give it to the clerk's office for distribution.
Second.
Okay.
Trying to make sure I behave myself.
Okay. Mr. Trainee?
What this does, this one incorporates all the amendments we had made to it, plus it redefines what occasional use is. We had that question of, the original version had occasional use for serving the public. What this does, it defines it as being quarterly just for Shrine members. So that's the last change I'm going to have to this before we vote on the main issue in front of us. But I would appreciate if the body would approve this.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move to postpone indefinitely.
Second.
Please vote. Motion to postpone indefinitely.
It would be cleaner if we did it the other way, but we'll play this way.
On Mr. Trainee's S1. Mr. Flynn made the motion.
The S1 was never approved. I made a motion to substitute. And that was never voted on. You have to do that before.
Okay, we got the motion to substitute. Please vote.
You got to deal with the motion on the floor, right?
The indefinite postponement, I think, is a superseding motion.
We need to give the clerk a couple of moments to catch up with us. Okay. We now have before us for action AR 104S1. Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll renew my motion if I
Second it.
can.
Okay, yes, Mr. Flynn.
That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. A motion and a second. Discussion. Mr. Trainee?
The reason for the S1 is try to define what occasional use was. I want to see this thing go down. It's not a good fit for my neighborhood. I've talked to people that live around this, negatively impacted by this. What I'm trying to make sure we don't have is another VFW, as we found in South Anchorage. So I'm more than happy to see this thing go away permanently. So it's just I wanted something on the record to redefine what we're trying to do. So I'm going to vote to postpone this indefinitely. Then I'm going to move to reconsider the postponement indefinitely and vote no so we can doubly kill this thing off. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This facility is in Mr. Trainee's district and mine, and I want to start off my comments this evening by first thank you, Mr. Starr, for reconsidering this, because when we dealt with it at the last meeting, Mr. Flynn had mentioned a lot of emails, which I never saw, but between the last meeting up until today, actually, we've gotten several emails from folks who live in that community who support the Shriners, but adamantly against this for a lot of reasons and reasons that made sense. And in addition to that, Mr. Trainee and I also attended our Rogers Park Community Council, where people who are directly affected by this, who would be directly affected by this, were at the meeting, and there was a resolution by the Rogers Park Community Council, and everybody has a copy of it. And the community voted 22 opposed to this. And I think it was 3 abstained, and I was one of them because that's my community council, and then 2 who voted yes. And it's real clear to me, as much as I support the Shriners and represent the interests of everyone in this community, the Shriners and the entire community, I just think that my decision to vote no on this is the right decision for the community, and I will be joining Mr. Trainee and voting no on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have before us the motion to postpone indefinitely. No one in the queue, please vote. That motion carries 10-1.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd like to move for immediate reconsideration, urge a no vote.
Okay, we have a motion for immediate reconsideration, urging a no vote. Please vote. That motion passes 10-1.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment, sir.
Yes, you may, Mr.
My thanks to the Assembly for listening to my constituents. Thank you very much. Appreciate your.
We now have before us item 13A, AO number 51, an ordinance to the Anchorage Municipal Assembly, amending Anchorage Municipal Code Section 3.30.174, governing executive compensation to update pay ranges. This item is before us for public testimony. Anyone to testify? Anyone at all? Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Good.
Excellent. My name is Jacqueline Hofflick. I'm the chairperson for the Human Resource Advisory Board for the municipality. And I believe, Daniel, did they give copies of all this? I'm sorry? Oh, okay. You've received electronically the Human Resource Advisory Board's recommendations and comments on this. What happened was when this first came before the municipality, I suppose, it was brought to the Human Resource Advisory Board for our review and comment. And as a group of human resource professionals in the community, we have a kind of a unique view in that we look at everything as though it's for our corporations that we work for, and we are all very much seasoned professionals in this area. And so through a lot of conversation back and forth, we developed these recommendations in our review. So.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work you do for the community. We really appreciate that. Mr. Honeman?
Yes, ma'am. Right here.
Oh, hi. Sorry.
Thank you for your service on this very important commission. Was your commission, was it tasked or challenged with A037 when the changes were going through at all? Were you asked for input on that?
On the first personnel rules changes?
Yeah, A037?
Yes, we did. And we went through a work session, I believe, with you all at that time.
Are you talking about A037?
Was it A037? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
3.3.
My apologies.
Could we ever pick up the microphone, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Danielle, would you please come up?
It's electronic. It came out today or yesterday.
Yes, I said I would help Jacqueline. I should come up and
That's
help
okay.
Jacqueline. 330 is the personnel rules, and the jurisdiction for HRIB is under, they provide recommendations for that set of ordinance. There is nothing for 370, so they would not have, they were not part of any 370. 330, what Jacqueline is referring to is there were some changes under 330 as part of Phase 1 changes under Nancy Ucera, and that's when there were other comments that were brought in.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. There's no one else in the queue.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing, hearing none, Mr. Trainee?
Mr. Chairman, I want to move, continue the public hearing until the 9th of July, sir.
Second.
Any objection?
And I do have an amendment that I want to pass out just for the body to take a look at. I'll be making this amendment on the 9th of July, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Seeing no objection, this will be carried over. We now have before us item 14A, AO number 115, a resolution of the municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, confirming and levying assessments for the water special improvements within levy upon connection, roll 13W1, setting date of payment and providing for penalties and interest in the event of delinquency. Anyone to testify? Anyone at all? Good evening.
Hi, how you doing? It's more, I'm just here as kind of a protest for Lot 4, Block 2, Roosevelt Park, owned by my corporation, Design Concept Incorporated. The special assessment that was levied, I don't believe that I got full service for a special assessment. Basically, when we purchased the property to build on, we were told by AWW that utilities were there on property. When we went to build, there was specifically for the water, there was no key box provided. This utility was put in the 50s. AWW did not have correct records as to the fact that there was a key box. The fact that there wasn't a key box was a surprise to us, so that we had to break into the street, do our own mainline tap, bring water to the property. So when I incurred all that expense, it kind of shocks me that there's also a special assessment, considering that there was not full service provided to this property. And that's all I want to say. It's kind of a protest to the assessment.
Okay. Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, you said line 4.
Lot 4, Block 2, Roosevelt Park in Spenard.
Sorry, one more time.
Lot 4, Block 2, Roosevelt Park subdivision. Design Concept Incorporated.
Mr. Rosenthal, while he's doing that, would you state your name for the record?
My name is Alan Rosenthal.
Okay, so
thank you.
So we're talking about $560 here.
Yeah, it's not a big deal.
It's a principle thing.
It's more of a protest. It just was. It was kind of upsetting when we found out that there wasn't, because we negotiated the price on the property too, based on the fact that we had key boxes, we had all of the utilities to the property, and then the records were wrong. Now I understand why they were wrong. This was all from the 50s, but part of that is, I mean, this thing's been paid off for a long time. So why is there a special assessment when I didn't really have all the services necessary to the property?
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Appreciate it.
Okay. There are no other questions. Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing, hearing none, this item is before the body.
Move to approve.
Any discussion? Seeing Mr. Honeman.
Real quick question to the administration: is there?
I think we need to amend line 21.
Is there a date? I guess we need to figure out a date on this, but secondly, is there an answer to the question and concern that was raised by Mr. Rosenthal?
I'll ask someone from AWW to come forward.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Brian Boss. I'm the Planning and Development Services Manager with the Anchorage Water Wastewater Utility, last name spelled B-A-U-S. To address the public comment, I forget the man's name, but what he was essentially talking about was payment for costs incurred due to incorrect records, and he had to incur costs associated with constructing a service connection. What the assessments are actually for levied on this roll are for the benefit of the main line that provides frontage to the property and not the service connection. So essentially the main lines that provided service to these properties were paid for by ratepayer funds, in some cases a long time ago, in this case the 50s as he mentioned. As people connect to those mains, then they have to pay back the costs the ratepayers incurred to build the actual main line. And in many cases, property owners pay for the cost of constructing the service connection from the main line to the property, then the property to the house is part of construction at the time of connection, but they are still responsible to refund the ratepayers for the cost of the main line that provided the benefit of service at the time of the original construction.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Steele?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Rosenthal's point was, however, that and maybe the records were wrong, or maybe the contractor that initially put them in was wrong, but he was told originally that there was a key box and where it was located, and he spent the time looking for that key box. So maybe the city got it wrong way back when in the records, but he relied upon those records to buy it, and then he had to go all the way to the street to make the connection. So that was an unanticipated $6,500 just doing that to dig up the street and get in and do it. So I think there is some fiduciary responsibility for the city to be providing adequate information or appropriate information, certainly not erroneous information.
Through the chair, I'd be happy to speak with Mr. Rosenthal after the meeting or sometime this week and go over his situation, just try to figure out what was going on. There is often trouble interpreting old records, and there is a lot of missing and incorrect information in the system, and we just have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis. It's just a cost of doing business. But I would be happy to speak with him after the meeting and just kind of go over his situation in detail and try to figure out what happened.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take a wild guess here, and I appreciate your response, but of a $65,000 assessment, I'm presuming if $560 came out of that, it wouldn't be terribly damaging to AWU's bottom line.
Well, unfortunately, though, we do have a tariff requirement to assess these properties no matter how small the assessment is. So we are bound by tariff to actually recover this money, and that is through Rule 8 of the Anchorage Water Tariff and the Anchorage Sewer Tariff. So regardless of the small dollar amount, if it's a requirement that he has to pay it back for a provision of service, we actually can't waive tariff is part of this. So
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I heard you, but you can or cannot?
Cannot.
Cannot.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can review it. If you would like, we could strike this property from this roll and go over the situation in greater detail. But if it is found that we are acting in accordance with the tariff, we will be adding it to the next luck roll that comes forward, and that might be 6 months down the road. So.
Would it be terribly troublesome to you if we did delete it tonight and allow you to review?
No, we can do that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Based on that, I'm going to ask that on page 636, we delete line 11, specifically tax code 010-20508-000, and ask that AWU revisit this when the next levy upon connection ordinance comes before us.
Second.
Okay. Mr. Starr?
Well, I'm going to speak against it. I think that the explanation was clear. They're two separate issues, is what I understand. We incur significant charges upon connection, and they're always a challenge in my community because they're so large. When the trunk line is put in, it's a calculated amount. This is independent of whatever engineering to hook up that he incurred or the overruns. So I guess it's a matter where I heard AWU say that they would talk about it to perhaps mitigate bad engineering data that he relied on. And I guess, ultimately the requirement to hook up is still the same whether or not he had bad data given to him or not. It's still an assessment. And $560 to assess a hookup is darn cheap. So I think at this point I'd say let's keep it as is and let the petitioner that claims this injustice talk to AWU and see for mitigation. So I'm a no on that.
Mr. Horniman?
I'm not sure if it's appropriate to put, I'll wait for the next, we need to put a date approved on line 21, so I'd recommend that we put in today's date.
That date is today. This is the public testimony.
So it'll be a passage, immediate upon passage?
Yes.
Okay.
Seeing no one else in the queue, please vote on Mr. Flynn's amendment. That motion passes 7-1.
No,
7-4. 7-4. Math is hard. We now have the original motion before us. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. We now have before us item 11B, AR number 116.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I have a conflict that was duly noted prior. One of the properties listed on the assessment roll is one that I developed, and I still have an interest of management and oversight of the bills. So I'll need to recluse myself on this one.
Very well.
Thank you.
We'll see you later.
Soon.
Bill, did you say 11B or 14B? 14B. Okay, thank you. A resolution, Municipality of Anchorage, confirming and levying assessments for the sewer special improvements within levy upon connection, roll 13S1, setting date of payment and providing for penalties and interest in the events of delinquency. This item is before the body for public testimony. Anyone to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing, hearing none, this item is before the body for action.
Move to approve.
Second.
Seeing no one in the queue, please vote. That motion carries 10 with one recused. We now have before us item 14C, AO number 72, an ordinance to the Municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, approving submission by the Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility on behalf of the Anchorage Water Utility and the Anchorage Wastewater Utility, proposed tariff revisions to Rule 1 and Rule 9 of the AWU and ASU tariffs regarding service extensions crossing parcel boundaries to the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. This item is before the body for public testimony. Anyone to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing, hearing none, this item is before the body for action.
Second.
Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not sure who the appropriate person to answer my question might be, but in some of our older neighborhoods, we have residential lines that cross adjacent properties, and therefore there's some question as to appropriate ownership and what needs to be done about that. Does this tariff adjustment address that in any way, shape, or form, and can you help me understand that? Thank you, Mr. Jokela. Appreciate your indulgence.
Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Chair, Mr. Flynn, through the chair. I'm Brett Jokela, the General Manager of AWW. It does indeed address some of the relic issues where we have properties, multiple properties served by the same service line. In fact, that's the intent, not specifically to fix all those old problems, but also to deal with other kinds of properties where we have fragmented lots, where we have leased lots, where we have other instances where there could be multiple services or multiple residences on a single lot, such as a site condo or as a private development where there's phasing in the private condo development, such that actually this is a rather new occurrence that if you have a condo development and financing requires that the property gets split into phases, so you have parcel A and parcel B, the services might extend through parcel A to parcel B, even though parcel B hasn't been developed yet or is to be developed in a later phase. So what we're trying to do with the tariff is to repair some of the issues that we've had in the past, plus allow for the more expeditious and cost-effective development of some of these newer parcels as well.
I appreciate the explanation, Mr. Jokela. I don't want to belabor everyone's time tonight, but if at some point you could, if someone could send me a note, sort of how this might affect some of the issues in third edition.
I'm sorry for.
Someone could send me a note with an explanation of how this tariff might address some of the issues in third edition. Which
in third edition?
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Just so I have that background.
Okay, I'm not sure if you have a particular parcel in mind, but we can communicate on that offline and figure that out.
The area south of Denali Elementary School.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in the queue, please vote. Motion carries unanimously. We now have before us item 14D, AO number 70, an ordinance amending Anchorage Municipal Code, section 6.50.030 to update investment guidelines for municipal funds and repealing in its entirety Anchorage Municipal Code, section 6.50.040. This item is before the body for public testimony. Anyone to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing, hearing none, item is before the body for action.
Move to approve.
Second.
Mr. Starr.
Ms. Mahoney, I just have one particular question about the, on page 2, it talks about the commingling of restricted funds. In my theory, which is perhaps convoluted here, on the operating costs and the management costs, my interpretation is when you have a larger pool of dollars in this arrangement, they would pay less management fees per percentage because they're more desirable. But the smaller funds, the more nitpicky funds that we have blended into that cost more. So in that commingled attitude where they all share revenues and expenses associated with that management of that fund, do the larger funds then sort of supplement and carry the cost of funds that would normally, traditionally, if they were kept separately, have a higher servicing cost? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think I understand. What we do is we do a weighting based on total dollars of investment in the fund, and we distribute the costs that way.
Does the government, but does the sort of cash pool relationship or those commingled funds, is there a financial benefit to do it? Do we get a preferred rate on servicing and the revenue costs associated with the expense handling?
Yes, absolutely. The larger
big
the pool,
one?
well, yeah. I mean, we have really low basis point fees because we can get into investment pools because we have, let's say, 50 million or 100 million to invest.
And my second question through the chair is to speak about the alignment with the upcoming ERP. One of the motivations, and I read it, but I'm not sure exactly where I read it. on line 14 on page 1. That is also the purpose of this action, is to realign.
What happened is as we were going through an evaluation of the business processes in the cash management and treasury area through the SAP process, because we're reevaluating every single business process, we realized that we should have been restricting some of our grant funds. And so because of that analysis, we are now moving these funds into restricted funds and taking them out of the general cash pool.
Got it. And so the new ERP system will kind of more or less automate that system as well? Not automate it, but keep track of it better?
Yeah, we're optimistic that the allocation of the realized and unrealized gains and losses associated with this restricted pool will be automated.
And this isn't a friction statement, but will we anticipate an additional change order coming online to manage those funds differently under the new ERP system with this change in regulation?
No.
Thank you. That's all I have. I just urge approval.
Mr. Honeman?
Okay, so I think I've read through it fairly well and got the concept here. My challenge for on page 2, the last line, restricted funds may be commingled with other similarly restricted funds within the discretion of the CFO. My concern is much along my question I had earlier. How are we going to be able to see where those funds were commingled to? We understand perhaps for the advantage of either interest or costing or whatever, but how am I going to be able to answer to someone if they said, hey, what about this one restricted fund for widgets, and you've commingled it somehow or another, so it shows $0 or it shows $1 or it shows $1 million, whatever. So are we going to be able to track this easy, is my question.
Yes.
Thank you.
You see no one else in the queue? Please vote. That motion passes 10 with 1 absent. We now have before us item 14E, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly ratifying Chief Executive Order 2013-07 and Executive Order renaming Mountain Ash Drive to Bazinga Court. This item is before the body for public testimony. Anyone to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing, hearing none, this item is before the body.
Move to postpone indefinitely.
Second.
And Bazinga is a trademarked, I believe is the proper term. So we can't do it. Plus, it also has, as Mr. Hall let everybody know that it has, in the Urban Dictionary, has it referring to illicit drugs. So we were going to kill this and kick it back to the department.
Rob?
Are you asking for me, Mr. Chair?
I had seen Mr. Wheeler in the queue.
Oh, I'm sorry. He had, the Assembly member Trombley looked this way when he asked about the trademark infringement, so I was ready to speak if that needed to be.
I wasn't sure if that was the proper term, but
that's the correct term, and that's what it is. It's a trademark of Warner Brothers Entertainment, and it relates to the show Big Bang Theory. So.
And what we'll do is start the process over again. This is one of the names that was recommended by one of the folks that lived there, so we'll just start the process over with.
Correct. Thank you. Mr. Flynn?
Just that the Kerslake family has been heavily involved in development of our community. I think would be a very appropriate name for this street. And I'll leave it at that.
No one else in the queue, please vote. Yeah, to postpone indefinitely. That motion carries unanimously. We now have before us item 14F, AR number 134, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly approving an alcoholic beverage conditional use for a beverage dispensary use and license number 3009 in the I-1 Light Industrial District for the Wedge Corp., doing business as the Rockwood Fired Pizza and Spirits at 3401 Penland Park. This item is before us for public testimony. Anyone to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing, hearing none, the item is before the body for action.
Move to approve.
Second, seeing no one in the queue, please vote.
Come on.
That motion passes 10-1. We now have before us item 14G, AO 66, an ordinance amending the zoning map and approving the rezoning of approximately .42 acres from the R1A single-family residential district and .84 acres from the B3 SL district for Deborah subdivision Block E, lots 1A and 4, and highway lot west of Deborah subdivision Block E, lot 4, T14N, R2W, section 1, generally located east of Old Glen Highway and south of North Juanita Loop Road. The item is before the body for public testimony. Anyone to testify? Anyone at all? Yes, sir. Please come up.
My name's Greg Everly. I work for the engineer representing the owner, and I'm just here for that. I don't know if I need to say anything further or not.
Okay. If we have some questions, we'll call on you. Mr. Horniman?
I did, sir, while you're here. We recently had some public notice concerns. You probably got them about cutting down, I guess, trees. Is that?
Oh, okay.
Is that necessary for the extent for the improvement or the addition or what?
I think the owner did that by mistake. It has nothing to do with the engineer, but I think they thought they could and did it. I don't know.
Okay. Does anybody know, have you heard from the owners whether or not they're planning to remedy that somehow or another to appease some of the concerns in the neighborhood?
I've not heard.
Okay. Thank you.
I've tried to stay out of that.
I hear you.
Thank you. Anyone else? You're fine, sir. Thank you. Anyone at all? Seeing, hearing none, this item is before the body.
Second.
Seeing no one in the queue, please vote. Motion carries unanimously. We now have before us item 14H, AO number 71, an ordinance of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly establishing the Chugiak Eagle River Advisory Board. Anyone to testify? Anyone at all? Good evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jim Arneson. I'm the land manager for Eklutna Incorporated. I represent Eklutna, the largest private landowner in the municipality. No single landowner has contributed more to this community than us. We have provided land for multiple schools, parks, roads, residential, commercial, and industrial developments all around. As currently written, this ordinance before you, Eklutna, is not included in the advisory board, and we are the single largest private landowner out in the area that is affected. This is bad for business and life in general, and because you're adding one more layer of bureaucracy. We develop land and we go through a tremendous process to get things done. We attend community council meetings, we come before the P&Z, we come before the assembly. We don't need more layers of bureaucracy. As it's written, the proposed ordinance does not provide a clear, defined timeline for response or applicability. With Alaska's short building season, this will have impacts to the development community, causing additional delays to the approval processes. This is similar to somebody living at Eklutna telling someone in Eagle River or South Anchorage what they can or cannot do. Eklutna does not support this ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Honeman?
Sir, thank you for giving us the information. I'm curious if I see it from your perspective as you defined it. I'm curious if you were to look at it from another, like almost flipping it 180 out. You're currently going to multiple community councils, kind of keeping them up to date as to what you're doing with your properties. Is that correct?
Correct.
Could you not see this as perhaps a one-stop shop where you're contacting the advisory board?
No,
So you don't have to go to each of the community councils?
This could be a two-stop shop, not a one-stop shop.
So
the way it's written, it doesn't allow for that.
Because it appears that the way that it's designed is that there'd be a representative from each of the community councils. They would act in an advisory capacity, so you wouldn't have to make all the reason I say this is because over in Muldoon and Northeast area, they've got several entities and businesses are completely flustered when they have to go to multiple community councils and match the dates, and sometimes they miss one, so they have to come back later. It seems like that seems a bit of a delay as well. So I'm just asking us, from the other perspective, if they were to, as I read it, if they were to be advisory as representatives of the community council.
I don't have a clear-cut answer for you on that.
All right. Thank you.
It's unclear what this ordinance, as it's written, will actually accomplish.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Flynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
It's been a while. My interpretation of this proposal is that it would be a mechanism that would only be triggered in larger, more, we'll say, community-wide projects are proposed. Do you have anything that you guys that Eklutna is working on that you think might fall into that category, or are most of your projects these days relatively discrete to the neighborhood in which you're executing them?
Well, typically, if a project is in a community council area, we address it with that community council. And I guess what I'm saying is if you have somebody up Skyline Drive and something's happening way up at Eklutna Lake, do you need to consult the people on Skyline Drive?
Sure.
Or, you know what I'm saying? It's a little far-reaching, I think.
I understand your point. Thank you.
Mr. Trombley?
Right here. The reason, from my understanding, the reason this is brought forward and why there's the authorization to establish the board is because it comes from Title 21, the rewrite of Title 21, Chapter 10, where it mandates that the Chugach Eagle River Advisory Board become in existence. I don't remember. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember Eklutna asking that section of Chapter 10 to be eliminated. Is it because you were unaware at the time, or why now and why not when we passed the rewrite of Title 21 in Chapter 10?
I suppose Tim Potter, our representative, could answer that. We have people that we hire to watch over these processes, and some of these processes we can't attend every meeting at all times.
No, I will ask him, because it's kind of confusing why we're having this challenge now when I never once heard about it until now. So, all right, thank you.
Mr. Steele?
Yes, thank you. I just have a tough time, and I know it's in Title 10, and that's or Chapter 10, and so that makes it unique in itself. But it seems to me, logically, it either is duplicative or it is sidestepping the community councils. I think the point brought up there is true. If we had that type of thing in the valley, or in Anchorage proper, not that Eagle River is not proper, but we would have to, we're telling applicants, people who are doing projects in areas all the time, go to the community council. Make sure you touch base with the community. Well, are they going to have to touch base with the community council and with this advisory board? And does that not add a layer?
Ms. Dembowski?
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
Quick question. In the language here, one of the seats is it would be reserved for the native village of Eklutna. Does Eklutna Inc. not have members that are both members of the village and sit on the board?
Yes, at Eklutna Inc., 3 of our 5 board members are actually village council members. They're tribal members. And so Eklutna Inc. is the correct entity if there is going to be a representative.
So not necessarily, and I look at this as a geographic thing. You know, we have Birchwood, Chugiak, Eagle River Valley, so you're not looking at the village as a geographical. You're looking more, you think Eklutna Inc. would be more appropriate than necessarily taking a geographic look? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Eklutna Inc. encompasses all those areas, and so to be excluded from any of those areas would be, considered inappropriate in our minds.
Second question that I have, I've had the opportunity to watch this presentation and hear the community talk about this for 9 months that I can think of. Would Eklutna Inc. be more comfortable if there was a provision in here to maybe put a sunset on it to try it for 2 years? Because what I'm hearing from the community is this is something that the community really, really was behind. I've never heard anybody speak against it until the last week or so. So if we had something on there and say a sunset clause to try it for 2 years and see if this, as a developer, does give you the opportunity to go to one place rather than 2 or 3, if you have cross-community council boundary topics, would that be something that Eklutna Inc. would support?
It's hard to say. That would be a decision of the board to say that they support it or not support it.
Okay.
There's one other provision in this ordinance that we kind of object to, and that is that any community council can request that the matter go to this advisory board. Any matter, anytime. Another delay. In our short building seasons, we can't afford these delays.
Thank you. There are no other questions.
Thank you.
Anyone else to testify? Anyone at all? Good evening.
Good evening. I'm moving a little slow with my back. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jim Palmer. I'm here representing myself and also the Chugiak Eagle River Chamber of Commerce, which I am President Emeriti. We are coming before you to speak against this resolution. We have been very active in the Title 21 debate over the last numerous years, and in particular, as a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, was very much involved in this earlier. I have written down a number of concerns I have with this, and I'll just go through them and maybe take questions afterwards. First of all, as already been mentioned, this appears to add another layer of bureaucracy. Question was asked by Mr. Honeman whether or not this could be viewed as a one-stop. Certainly, if that were the case, I think we may be in a different place, but no, it does not. Nowhere in the ordinance does it say that the community council's powers and responsibilities are all changed or any way given to the advisory council, so this would be an additional. Certainly would slow down projects. When I was a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, I saw numerous bureaucratic obstacles for whatever reasons, and this seems to just add another one. Secondly, my experience with community councils is many of them don't meet during the summer. Sometimes they don't have enough, many people show up, so there would be potentially a problem with having all the community councils participate in our area. We have had many discussions over the last year, both on the federal, state, and local level about cost to government. Certainly this is going to add cost. who is going to staff this. Just the amount of paper that I used to get at planning and zoning was enormous. I imagine you get double that. What would the cost of running this advisory board? Why weren't other groups that are currently in Eagle River Chugiak considered? We have a park board there. We already have a road board. We have both a regular police fire board. The question is, why just community councils? It also appears to give special status to the community councils in our area versus the other parts of the city. I would hope that this would not be an avenue for the community councils to even have more authority than they currently have, or ways of being part of the process, and I'm not sure it's a valuable one. Right now, under the proposed ordinance, even if a project does not cross a community council boundary, but as a large project, this body reviews. There is no timeline to this at all. On page 2, line 14 through 16 has already been mentioned. It allows any community council can request a project be handed over to the advisory. I live in Eagle River Valley. There's nothing stopping my community council, there are 4 or 5 of us there, to say we want to review and elevate to the advisory council a project in Birchwood or Chugiak. I don't think that's proper.
Okay. Mr. Palmer, I need you to conclude, and I've got a couple of questions.
Okay. I mentioned the just technical, no language on how members should be appointed, the length of terms of staffing, and frankly, it's not needed, and we view it as just an unnecessary, expansive government intrusion. Thank you.
Mr. Trombley?
Thank you for coming down. As I'm consistently reminded by my friends from Chugiak Eagle River, they do view their area as special and unique, and I'd have to agree. You know, you guys, the way you guys take care of your parks, the way that there's the funding for roads, and so I think that there is a uniqueness to Chugiak Eagle River that, unlike other parts of the Anchorage Bowl. But at the same time, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked the gentleman before you. Is that I have here Title 21, Chapter 10, where it mandates that the board come into existence. I have resolutions from, I'm assuming, is this every community council in Chugiak Eagle River? 5 or 6? In that support Chapter 10, none of them saying that we don't want the board. So I'm wondering, did your organization, were they involved in the writing of Chapter 10? Did they fight it at the time? Why are you bringing this to our attention now and not when we passed Title 21?
Assembly Trombley, I think the answer to that is yes, we were very involved, especially in the Eagle River chapter and the overlay district for the downtown area. I think the reason is, frankly, that there were larger issues at the time. We saw this as an issue, but frankly, we bided our time on the bigger issues at the time, so it's just coming up now. To be quite candid with you.
So would you support the repeal of 2110-030?
That's a good question. You know, it's interesting when we were going through Title 21 rewrite for Eagle River Chugiak, the community councils came together and did a very good job of coordinating with one another on the rewrite. That was a special case. And certainly if the comprehensive plan for our area were to be redone or revisited, this certainly would be totally advisable, and we would support fully this advisory or the community councils coming together. I think this expands their remit so beyond what we thought was beneficial at the time that we would ask to be amended potentially as opposed to be repealed.
Okay, that's all, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Johnston?
Yes. Are you familiar with the Girdwood Land Use Committee when you were on the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I was familiar with it, but I couldn't speak with any authority to it.
Just, they, as a community, go through this land use process and vote up or down or give the community's will, and then it goes to the Board of Supervisors, and then it would probably come to you and the Assembly. I just was wondering, the difference I see between the Girdwood Land Use committee is that they only have one sort of community council. But I just was wondering, as a planning and zoning commissioner, even then it's advisory. Is that how you felt when you were a commissioner?
We felt it was very much advisory, but we gave great weight to the community council.
Okay, thank you.
At least I did.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Honeman.
Yes, Mr. Palmer, I'm looking at an attachment from the Chugacki River Chamber of Commerce dated in October of 2011. I'm not sure if that was referred, but basically at that point, it seems that, I don't know if it's the Planning and Zoning Commission, but it looks like it was addressed to them. And maybe that's what you were just addressing, but basically they were essentially sanctioning one perspective. They were against sanctioning just one perspective of overall larger projects. And I think that was spoken to earlier, and I can't remember if it was someone on the floor or someone on this body, but you know, I kind of go back to if they're advisory, and for lack of better terms, one of the concerns that you had, which is in the summertime, some of the community councils are really difficult to track down. But if this panel were advisory board or whatever, we're representing, if you will, and had the discussion, I think the argument can be made, look, you know, you guys weren't meeting the advisory board to made the approval, and I don't think it usurps if the community council has voted to continue this. And I see the concern where it says the recommendation of any community council. I would go so far as to say it, if we were to reduce that to say only the affected community council could send it to the advisory board, would that be more appropriate? Or?
Yes, I think so. I would personally recommend, I can't speak for the chamber here, but we give this some time and see if we can work some language we all can agree on.
Thank you.
There are no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone at all?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly, my name is Tim Potter with LHCAM. I'm actually here as myself tonight, expressing comments and thoughts based on observations over 32 years of doing this type of work in Anchorage. Quickly, I don't think that I or anybody else is questioning whether or not through Chapter 10 that there was an adoption of a format that would go forward to create an advisory board. I don't believe there's a question there. I testified at the Assembly work group that worked on Title 21. I testified at the Chapter 10 meetings, and I know that Jennifer, if Ms. Oziander was here tonight, she would be able to tell you that there was discussion about this very specific issue about, you know, what the role of this thing really was. It was, you know, if everybody were fully in tune with how much documentation and the volume of material that was being reviewed by everyone, including yourselves, at that time, this is one of those items that was kind of a little trailing thing at the time, and likely didn't get all the attention that it should. So I'm not going to argue that it's not set up to be implemented and adopted by an ordinance. I'm just suggesting that the current ordinance proposed doesn't provide enough clarity as to exactly what the role is, what the purpose is, what they're supposed to act on, when things go in front of them. And with the remaining time I have left, I'll try and address some of the questions that were asked. First, I'll ask Mr. Honeman, if you can show me in the writing of this proposed ordinance where it says that this is a one-stop shop, I'll be more than happy to sit down right now, because it's not there. And don't believe that that's the case. Nothing in this ordinance or the proposal of the advisory board takes away the charter-based authority and involvement of the community councils. So this is an additional step. Don't kid yourself. It's not an instead of. It's an additional step. I think where I have the biggest argument is that when it explains at what point you go to this group, anything that is a planning board, planning commission, zoning board of examination appeals, or UDC item goes to this body with a caveat that says if in fact notice is required to more than one community council. If you look in the new Title 21, it clearly states that if you are or the project is within 1,000 feet of an abutting community council, then you have to give notice to that council. It also says that the planning director can effectively determine if in fact in their opinion they believe it's a significant enough thing that it should go out to more than one community council. And I can absolutely tell you that most of the recent projects that Eklutna Inc. has brought forward have been required to have multiple notices going to community councils by the municipal planning department, and it would fall into this case. And it would be duplicative. A couple of other items. I think that it's important to note, and maybe I have a either old copy or something, but in Chapter 10, when you look at the Chugiak Eagle River Advisory Board, there's items B1, 2, 3, and under 3 there's ABC, and there's no D, and maybe I have an out of time copy.
Mr. Potter, I need you to summarize, and I've got some questions for you.
I would love to have a lot of questions asked. My recommendation is that there is not enough clarity as to when, how, what projects, and how this body acts, because it says they shall review and comment to the other boards and commissions, the municipal staff and that. I believe there's within this ordinance an expectation that's been created that they have almost a quasi-judicial stance.
Okay, I'll let Mr. Starr start.
Thanks for your input, Mr. Potter. I have questions as it relates specific to our area, and you're aware of the fact that we have our own comprehensive plan, our own supposedly long-range transportation plan, and now a distinct chapter of the Chugach Access Plan, for example. What mechanism do you know of out there now that we could handle those topics at? The comprehensive plan rewrite is supposed to come in front of us here pretty quick. The long-range transportation plan, we just combined it and approved it. What mechanism do we utilize as a community out there to review our own documents?
All of those documents, they typically go out to the community councils, at least notice that those documents are coming forward. And people within the community councils, if they're interested, review those. And some community councils review them thoroughly and comment, show up at the hearings, and some don't.
And so the concept of a unified body that sort of has deliberative authority over that process of structuring and organizing somehow is not appropriate in your testimony. I don't get that.
I believe that if what you're looking for is an advisory board that looks at the global things from a policy standpoint, impact standpoint, and other things, like looking at the OSHP, other things that actually affect the larger area, the transportation plans for the area. If the comprehensive plan for Eagle River, Chugach, Birchwood, Eklutna came up again, that's an appropriate item. I think that's where the focus of this advisory group should be. I do not believe that the advisory group, with one individual from each of the community councils, should be looking at the details of a Birchwood gravel operation, which did have the requirement to go to multiple community councils, which would have fallen under this threshold. So I think that they're losing the bigger focus, the umbrella 30,000-foot view, and being asked to do that and much smaller things.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
Mr. Birch?
Thank you for your testimony this evening, Tim. I guess, would it be your recommendation then that we, basically delete 2110-030B, Chugach Eagle River Advisory Board? And I'm all for getting rid of additional layers. It sounds to me like the 30,000-foot look for Chugach Eagle River is well provided by their elected representatives.
I attended a lot of the meetings, and I looked very closely and reviewed Chapter 10 and provided to the consortium and their consultants' comments and that. And I'll stand here right now, and while that is certainly an option that would resolve my concerns, I think in reality if in fact the role of this group was to look at the real, true, larger picture items, and that was standardized and clearly stated, that would be the most appropriate. So I really do think there's value in an advisory board to look at that global thing, because Eagle River, Chugach, they have different issues than we have here in the Bowl. And there should be an advisory board.
I guess,
but you have to have some control over what they look at, because right now it is not clear. It's not clear whether or not they are going to look at things and schedule their meetings after the community councils have each provided their input, so the representative from each community council that's assigned to the advisory board actually goes to the advisory board with that input, or if it works backwards the other way. I don't know. That's why I'm recommending that you either table this or put it off until it's clear and clear to everybody, because I can tell you right now, the majority of you on the assembly are reading and looking at it one way and interpreting it in a way that's not really what it says and may not be how it works. I'd love you to ask the municipal attorney. And in closing on that comment, I don't see a fiscal impact analysis, which is a requirement of every ordinance that comes to you. And I don't see it attached. Maybe it's just not attached.
Well, thank you very much. And like I say, my concern is just the timeline, as prior testimony addressed, that there's concerns towards a layering process, if you will, in the review. And it's not, as somebody commented earlier, not a situation where it's a one-stop shop. It's not replacing the community council, objective in reviewing a proposal. It's just it's actually adding another layer. So, thank you very much for your testimony.
Mr. Trombley.
Mr. Potter, did Eklutna pay you to help Chapter 10 through the process?
Eklutna had a contract with me to monitor Chapter 10 and follow that process, yes.
Okay. How adamantly were you against 2110-030B at the time?
At the time, I actually attended a meeting in Eagle River and indicated that if in fact there was going to be an advisory board, because the original makeup of the board did not include anyone from Eklutna. And the recommendation was from Eklutna Inc. In whatever fashion it became the native village of Eklutna, which in my view is not appropriate.
So are you saying that you were pretty adamantly against it?
I actually gave written testimony.
Against that section?
Yes.
On behalf of Eklutna? Okay. All right, thank you.
There are no other questions. Thank you. Anyone else to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing, hearing none, this item is before the body for action.
I move to approve.
Second.
Mr. Starr?
Well, earlier in the evening, I moved to the front of you guys a couple amendments. I'd like to address them because they may clarify a couple of the topics, and then we can address the main topic. So there's a single sheet that's there which talks about floor amendment number 1, which, if you can sort of follow along, does two things. Is it clarifies by taking out the words Peters Creek. It illuminates the fact that there are 6 community councils representative out there as active, and that matches the Chapter 10 language, as well as we add the word in that same section, recommended appointment, and that's typical how we handle appointments. So the words Peters Creek would be stricken, and the words recommended appointment by the mayor and confirmation by the assembly.
Second.
And that's basically, as I described it in my amendment, it's essentially aligning that designation of 6 community councils as it reads in the actual approved Chapter 10. That's what those are.
Anyone to speak to the amendment?
Yes.
Mr. Honeman.
Mr. Starr, do you intend that Eklutna or the native village of Eklutna, does that address the concern from one of the speakers? Then Eklutna Inc., is that your interpretation?
It has a couple of areas, and it's a little bit more deliberative on the larger topic, in that there wouldn't be anything that would prevent the village, the native village of Eklutna, to sort of appoint a designated representative. That could be basically anybody that the village felt represented their interests. They could hire Mr. Potter, or they could appoint Mr. Arneson, or a prolific board member that wanted to expand their duties and responsibilities. I think so. I don't see restrictive language anywhere that the native village of Eklutna is restricted by who they appoint.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the amendment? Seeing none, please vote on the amendment. The amendment passes unanimously. Mr. Starr.
My floor amendment number 2 speaks to a sunset clause, and as you know, this body went through that. So in terms of trying to align it, I'd like to modify Section 2 with this advisory board shall terminate on October 14th of 2015 unless affirmatively continued by the Assembly in accordance with Section 4.05.150.
Second.
And this is really a check-all. You know, if we make an error, we've got land use changes in code probably taking place in this October. People will start writing to the new code. They'll be writing to Chapter 10 of the new Title 21 as developments come out. I think you'll start to see work come forth in probably early October. That's about an 18-month window to see if this concept makes any sense, as well as the October timeline is when we will review and sunset any non-performers of boards and commissions. So that's the logic between now and the sunset clause.
Any comment on the amendment? Seeing none, please vote. The motion carries unanimously. The ordinance is now back before us as amended. Mr. Trombley.
Did I still have the floor, Mr. Chairman, or did I yield? Sorry.
You may still have the floor.
It's just
That's
a point.
fine. Go ahead.
I don't mind. I want to say sort of my piece. I try not to debate the body here. Some of what's happening now is that we're revisiting places that we've gone to, and I don't want to speak badly against Ms. Osiander because she really did put her life and soul into this, and it was a long, drawn-out process with many, many opportunities to testify for us, and this was sort of the end result. I always tried to align my opinions with hers or ask her to come over to my opinions, and this was one case over the whole advisory board and its duties and responsibilities that we differed. And I don't know if it was evident the night of the Chapter 10 approval. It was a big reason why I supported Title 21 in total as a pledge I made to the community. One of the other opportunities that I see is that we have, in my area in particular, a lacking opportunity. You know, we all know community councils. I've been president for 3 terms of my own, and it's very hard to get interest on an area that isn't in your backyard, but it's vital to a growing community such as mine. Eklutna has done a fine job of showing us, and I was asked for an opportunity for this entire body to see just what they have at resources and assets at their disposal. And my area, along with Amy's area, is going to be front and center to development. I certainly want good development, and I see this as a solid mechanism for input. Input is never a bad thing when you get it from your community. This provides structure. That's why I was adamant to leave it in. I think the views that I see with Mr. Potter and Mr. Palmer's statement about the arbitrary nature of it, the actual code language is in front of you as well, and it's very specific to some of the things that I find that are lacking. The comprehensive plan review, you'll see big box store changes. We've got an overlay district in front of us now for the Eklutna Village that'll be coming at us pretty soon. There is no centralized body that will hear that. I think this does that. The community councils are the ones that bring forth the recommended language that you put. It's a recommendation. The separation of powers discussion is that the mayor gets to weigh in on whether that candidate's willing to serve, and then we affirm that at the assembly. I find that good government, and I guess I'm not necessarily embarrassed. In front of you also is 5 letters of council support. There's 6 out there that are active. 5 of the community councils directly speak to the advisory body in the paperwork that I have in front of you. And Eagle River Valley has weighed in on the topic. I have nothing written from them, but it's my council area as well as Mr. Palmer's. So in that case, I think it is sort of the will of this form of government. Certainly the stakeholders, such as these larger folks with their interests, they need to be represented. They do a great job of representing development planning and zoning. I was on it as well, and you get great presentations from that. We're a little bit different out in Chugiak Eagle River. We're a little more homespun, and we don't mind public meetings. We don't mind public debates. I will work hard to make sure it's not a slowdown to development. I'm on the development side, and I don't want to risk that window of build opportunities either. And my pledge is to bring this forth, let the folks determine the operating guidelines and the rules of control. So that's my spiel. I am sort of passionate with it. It closes the loop for me on Chapter 10, which has been an item since I got on this body to see through, and I think it's got support of the community. Thank you.
Mr. Trombley.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Starr answered all my questions.
Ms. Johnston.
Well, as you all might have remembered, when we got to this point in Chapter 10, Ms. Osiander asked me to bring forward an amendment that would strike this out of the code. She was not in favor of it. She felt that it did add a extra layer, and she felt it would get kind of convoluted, and it would be an excessive process for Eagle River, and we all know how much Ms. Osiander cares about Eagle River and zoning in Title 21 and Chapter 10. I did receive a text from one of the consultants on Chapter 10, and they said when they had proposed this in Chapter 10, it was supposed to be a review and involvement group for comprehensive plan, streets, and highway. So they were looking at those broader issues as opposed to the usual community council type planning and platting. When Ms. Osiander asked me about it, you tend to go with what you know in your own district. And in the hillside, what we have is HALO. And HALO is a nonprofit, and it has no other authority other than it's created its group as a body that discuss everything, and it's an advocate for the hillside. And most people go to them with their zoning issues, with their trail plans, with whatever. They're an advocacy group, and they're an advocacy group for the hillside. I think that something like that, an overall Chugiak Eagle River advocacy group would be great, but I'm not sure if you need to put it in code. HALO does well without being in code. The other thing, as I mentioned to Mr. Palmer, was the Land Use Committee in Girdwood. And Girdwood is also an interesting little community, and it has its own ways and its own thoughts. And those land use committees are very involved and very, they can be quite contentious. They take it very seriously, and they should. But really, Girdwood has their land use, their parks, and the GBOS, and it is like it's one community council. So it makes sense for me that GBOS has separated out the land use from the parks, from the road. So again, that makes sense. But Eagle River Chugiak, to add this extra layer, Ms. Osiander did convince me that it was too much. And it was something that really wasn't, she felt necessary beyond what you have as your community councils. And we all know, we all take our community councils very, very, very seriously. But they are advisory. So what you're doing is you have community councils, and then you have another advisory group on top of it that then goes to planning and zoning, which in all due respects is advisory to us. We have abrogated some of our responsibility, but planning and zoning so it ultimately comes to assembly. So if you're a person that you're out trying to do a development, that's a lot of advisors. And that also will depend on who shows up to the meetings, as it always does. So I can't speak as well as Ms. Osiander. I'm not from Eagle River Chugiak, But I am from the hillside, and I do have Girdwood, and I have these other examples, and I would suggest that we rethink this. I would, in fact, I'd like to propose a motion to postpone this for 2 weeks and see if the drafters would like to spend some time with the community and see if they can come up with something that everybody agrees on.
Okay, we have before us a motion to postpone and a second. Any comment on the motion?
Confirming that's the meeting of June 18th?
Meeting of June 18th.
Yes.
Seeing no comment.
I'm in the queue, Mr.
Oh, I've got so many. Okay, Mr. Starr, gotcha.
You know, I'm not interested in rushing this, but if you study it like I do, because it's a document that's near and dear to me, which I've read it, and particularly this one, I think it's timely to do it. We've solicited fairly recent conversations with the community. There was a large event in my community that celebrated this Chapter 10, and it was about 5 weeks ago. And all of the players that were there from the very beginning, and I was on that side when I petitioned this body to implement this Chapter 10, most of the significant players were there at the celebration. And I will tell you what that felt like when you had your community of 40-some folks acknowledge their own efforts, their own speak. We're not empowering anything that's costing the city money. There's nothing in there that says the city will have a budget to implement this. They're not asking for staff. They're asking to implement what we've already talked about, and that's in Chapter 10, I'm sorry. It was a cut and paste, almost entirely, the duties and responsibilities, the structure, the advisory board. It's very simple. It's 21 lines long, and I think we've done a very good job of that. There won't be anything more that I can really do. I can perhaps work with these stakeholders that, again, perhaps want a seat at the table, but they're very good at seats at the table when they go to planning and zoning and all the other stuff. So I don't know what will happen in 2 weeks that would ask me to rewrite this. I still take obligation and responsibility for Chapter 10. It's sponsored by the other member that represents the area. So kicking it down the road isn't going to really change the service product that I can see happening. So, I'm just asking you. It's time. We've had this debate. We understand. We just need to agree to disagree and move on. I'm not abandoning it. I continue to represent the area. I want this to work right, but I need to start on it. We need to get names forward, operating guidelines. If we delay it and delay it and delay it, it's going to be typical government, and I'm not in the mood for that. So, politely, no to the delay.
Ms. Dombowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Ms. Osiander and countless members of the community that did weigh in on this topic, we all care about this community. And I have to say, postponing it 2 weeks to engage the community, to me, it doesn't make sense. I mean, before you have 5 letters, written letters from community councils, and I can guarantee to you there's 6 community councils. Every one of them has unanimously support the creation of this advisory board, as well as the community involvement. Our community, I personally witnessed Mr. McCain, who's sitting here today, give the presentation to 3 different community councils, and at least 2 of them were packed. And I've never once heard anybody in my community, except for Debbie, shirk at the creation of this advisory board. Our community celebrates it because we look at it as a way, it's a grassroots request to say, let us be involved in the development of our own community. Let us be involved. Let us be an opportunity for developers to come talk to us. Let us be another avenue, not the only avenue, but another avenue. And so I implore you guys, this has not come from the top down. This was a grassroots effort from the community. Every single community council wants this. So I just ask that you let our community develop and weigh in and be inclusive in a process that we have been working on for months and months. And like Bill said, at that event that was a few weeks back, I don't know, there was probably 60, 70 people there. It was a good turnout. And these are people that care about their community and the development of their community. So I would just urge a no vote on postponing this and let our community move forward. Thank you.
Anyone else on the motion? Seeing, hearing none, this is the motion to postpone for 2 weeks.
I'm in the queue.
Oh, Mr. Steele.
Yes. Thank you. I was leaning towards postponing it, but I don't think that's going to do what we want. And I think we were actually on the amendment number 2, that is what we were referring to. I don't think we've taken a vote on the amendment number 2 to postpone.
We have.
We have? Okay, I missed that particular action. But the bottom line is. Okay. I'll vote to postpone it for 2 weeks.
Anyone else? You have to raise your hands at this point. I've got people in the queue to vote on the main motion, so we're on amendments. Okay, please vote on the amendment, or on the motion to postpone. The motion to postpone fails 8-3. The main motion is back before the body. And I have in the queue Mr. Honeman.
So I hear the concerns of the entities, particularly Cluton Inc., who I think they pretty aptly said that they, and I know, Mr. Starr, you and I have taken visits out to Cluton Inc. and talked to some of the representatives. So I'm very familiar with the fact that they are a fairly large, probably the largest landholder in that area and through Chugach Eagle River. And so I want to support this to try, because we just recently had a meeting on public hearings, the public coming in and wanting to have their input and their voice heard. And I'm all for trying to bolster community councils and community input and support. And I know how difficult it is on matters involving construction. We had the Walmart, Sam's Club, the Hot Commons. We've had, in our area of town, Olive Garden, we've had all these different businesses and developments coming up, and we've got the Town Square Park that people are concerned about, and realignment of a creek. There's just a whole lot of things, moving parts going on, and it's a dickens of a time for any one individual community council to get each project and its representatives in front of them. So I'm in support of trying something like this almost regionally, each district as we are representatives, because I think that leads to more public input, and I think good input, and then we can make reasoned decisions. And when someone does finally come in and challenge us, we could say, well, where were you? We've had not just 22 people at a community council, or some of the community councils I go to, there's as few as 8 or 9. So, to me, this makes sense, or at least to try it, but I'm also concerned about some of the input I've heard from tonight. So I'm asking your word, Mr. Domboski, Mr. Starr. I know that you've got a challenge here in the next year or so yourself, but I know, Mr. Domboski, you're here for 3 at least, and so I'm asking you, I'm imploring you, and I'm really expecting to me monitoring this to make sure this isn't going to go awry, and that the first sign that it does, that we bring it back before us and say we can make some modifications. And I'll support you. I think it's worthy of a try. Thank you.
Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Honeman, I concur with everything you said. I take, and I want to point out that Cluton Inc. is the largest landowner, not only in the municipality of Anchorage, but I believe in the Mat-Su Borough as well. So when they show up and they talk, I take what they say very, very seriously, and I don't want to make development harder for people, but I want to make sure we have good development, and I want to make sure we have good community input. But just as I take the word of Mr. Arneson and Mr. Potter very seriously, I also take the word of every single community council in my area very seriously. And like I said, over the campaign over the last year, I was out and I talked to a lot of people, and I went to a lot of community council meetings, and I never once heard one person say they were against this advisory board. The only time I heard somebody say it was Debbie, honestly. And no, I didn't go to the Title 21 meetings, but from the grassroots community council level, people were excited about the opportunity to try something different and to create more community dialogue. And I can tell you this is not a service area board, like our Parks and Rec or Roads board. This is an advisory board. But sitting in the Subversive Road Board meetings and sitting in the Parks and Rec meetings, people show up to those meetings. The community council members that are appointed to those boards, they show up. They're very engaged. They go back, give reports to the community councils, because I've been there during the meetings and then after the meeting at the community council meeting when they give their reports. And it creates a robust dialogue, and people get to know what's going on in their community, not just in my little community council area, but I know what's going on in Birchwood, and I know what's going on in Eagle River, and sometimes those conversations, they overlap, and it spurs great ideas. So once again, I would just allow this body to let the people do what the people do best, and that's talk amongst each other and come up with great solutions. And, you know, I'm sure Bill will be the same, but I absolutely will watch this board like a hawk, and, you know, if something goes awry, I hope developers like Eklutna Inc. will be open and forthcoming with us, and we'll address issues if they come up. Thank you.
Mr. Birch?
Yeah, my concerns basically stem from the timing and the obligation that anyone would have to go to both the community council and the advisory board. To the extent that the advisory board allows building-related and planning-related oversight, it appears to me to be duplicative of community council review. And if it was in fact a one-stop shop, I'd say fine, but I'm going to be a no vote on this. I think less is more. Less is better, and I think if you had a single stop, you engage the community councils, somehow or another, if this was to supplant or replace going to a community council, I'd say that'd be great. But it looks to me like it's just layering up, and I guess until we can address that, and we've got a sunset provision in there, so I suppose if this passes, we'll have an opportunity to review it later. Thanks,
Mr. Trombley.
Mr. Starr, Mr. Dabowski, I'll support you on this, and I'll tell you why. No one ever can accuse Mr. Starr of being anti-development, and he worked very, very hard on Chapter 10. He had a lot of input from his community. He listened to his community, and he helped usher this thing through. And this was one of the aspects that came out of that, is that the community obviously wants this. It made it through the process, and I'm willing to give it a try. You know, one of the things I'd like to do is, earlier we supported Mr. Traney and Ms. Gray Jackson on a liquor license for their community. They didn't want it. We understand that, and we try to support each other in things for our areas. And so I look forward to doing that for you guys. And I know that this can be successful because I know that the community wants it, and I know that you guys have worked very hard to get it in there. So keep me updated on how it goes.
Mr. Steele.
I'll vote for it this time around, but I am concerned that somebody's going to get cut out of the process, or it's going to take more time for somebody to get something through the process, having to go to this additional board. I have 6 community councils in my particular area, and you sit through, when you go to all of them, you sit through night after night of these people going from council to council to council, making their presentation. If this cut out that process, then it might be advantageous to the person who wants, or to whatever the issue is, whether it be Parks and Rec or whoever, then that might be okay. But then the community councils either wither on the vine, or they don't have the information, or they have to all go to this particular meeting as well. So it is going to slow the process down. It is duplicative, and I'm not sure. I guess when it comes back, we'll have to see. But I will be a yes vote.
Mr. Traney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Starr and Mr. Dombrowski, you guys, we voted for Title 21. This was in Title 21. I appreciate you having a sunset clause on this. So let's go forward and see how this thing works. I'll be a yes vote on this.
Ms. Johnston?
Yes, I will be a yes vote on this. And the reason is because I don't live in Chugiak Eagle River. And I've always taken it very seriously that we're responsible for our districts when it comes to legislation. And in fact, I've reminded Mr. Starr when he's tried to do some things with my limited road service districts. I hope you remember that. And so I will be supporting the Chugiak Eagle River Assembly people. Thank you.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to say anything, but I don't want to be the only one who doesn't say that I'm going to support this before the vote. But I am going to support it, and I'm supporting it because I believe it's the right thing to do, although I really appreciate the testimony from Mr. Potter and others who felt that we should put the brakes on. But just like Mr. Chomley mentioned with Mr. Trania and my issue earlier this evening, we want to represent the interests of everybody in this community. But when the community overwhelmingly, as yours, supports something that you're bringing forward to this body for us to act on, I really don't have any other choice. So I'm happy to support this ordinance, and thank you. Sorry, Ms. Osiander.
Seeing no one else in the queue, please vote. That motion passes 10-1.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to urge immediate reconsideration, Adam, and motion so.
Second.
And urge a no vote.
Please vote. The motion carries unanimously. We now have before us item 14I, AR number 125, a resolution of the municipality of Anchorage appropriating $32,400 as a contribution from the 2013 operating budget area-wide General Fund 101, Public Transportation Department to the Public Transportation Capital Improvement Program Fund 485, Public Transportation Department Section 5309 grant when tendered to the $120,000 to the Public Transportation Capital Improvement Program Fund 485, Public Transportation Department for Capital Assistance. Anyone to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing, hearing none, this item is before the body.
Second.
Mr. Honeman.
I had a question. I don't know if Ms. Jody's here from People Mover. I'm just quickly, if you could, I'm curious how veterans, and perhaps I can get the response offline, but how the veterans and either active duty and military families make contact or reach out. I see that all the technology, the one-click, one-call center, and all that kind of stuff. Is there a way that I can pass this along to constituents? East Side is heavy with veterans and certainly active duty. So I was unaware of this actual program until I saw it come for this.
Sure. Through the chair, Mr. Honeman, the federal government is really big on coordinating all the human services transportation systems that are out there. Our department has been supportive of this concept for probably 20 years. One of the biggest barriers to coordinating all these transportation providers is not having essentially a one call for all, a one click. This is our first step on being able to do something like that. We're just getting our feet wet right now.
Okay, that's why I haven't heard it before. Right.
Yeah.
I'd look forward to, maybe I'll get with you guys at a later point and try to get a handle on it. I just know that in Fairbanks, I was told in Fairbanks there was a gentleman, a veteran, Alaska Native veteran that I met at AFN a couple years ago, and I actually paid for 1 month of a pass until he got to a certain age. But when he went to Fairbanks, he found out that it was free ridership from some veterans program they're using. So I'm just curious how this works. I'm curious to find out more about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
See no one else in the queue, please vote. That motion carries unanimously. This concludes our regular order of business. There are no special orders or unfinished agenda. Audience participation. Anyone to speak?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly, two money-related issues I'd like to bring up. First of all, Mr. Starr, two money-related issues having to do with public involvement. As many of you know, I do a lot of public involvement. All of you see me at all the community councils all the time. And so I am one that deals with and like good attendance at community councils. And sometimes I feel like I'm the only one that is furthering the charter by bringing projects forward that are controversial enough that it actually turns out a lot of people at community council meetings so that they get involved. And Amy knows what I'm talking about here recently. But there are two money-related things, and you know that I also support the planning department. Some of you do, some of you don't, from a financial standpoint. But in fact, the ordinance that was just passed does have a fiscal impact on the planning department because it says the department director or his designee will be the official secretary. I don't know exactly what that means, providing support, running copies, doing whatever it does like they do for all the other commissions that are referenced here. As with other land use related boards, the Director of Community Development or the Director's designee serves as the executive secretary to the board. This allows both building related and planning related oversight. So I think there will be a supportive role. However, I don't believe that there's a compensatory amount that was put in the budget to accommodate that. And the planning department, in my opinion, is under budgeted, understaffed, and is a problem right now for this community. So I would hope that when you look at the budget again, recognize that there is a cost, even though it may be minor. When a lot of minor things get piled up as far as costs, all of a sudden we're talking real money, and half a staff person or a quarter of a staff person, and it means that they aren't working on another thing, and it doesn't get done as fast. The second item is a bigger item, and that's overall community councils. When the Federation of Community Councils was set up in support of the grassroots effort of the community council process by charter, the city was a significant funder of that federation. And that allowed that organizational arm to make copies, send out notices, do education, and get everybody organized to make sure it was done. And there are failing community councils in the system. Now, having listened to your discussion just now, made me want to get up and say, okay, everybody wants good community input. They want active community councils. The Assembly needs to consider refunding in a larger way than you currently do the Federation of Community Councils and having a mandatory support service to organize and make sure that the community councils are informed and active. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. We do have a question. Mr. Trainee?
Mr. Potter, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at all the community councils and to see what we can do to help them be successful.
Yeah, I would appreciate it, and I'd be more than happy to be involved in any way you'd like me to.
We'll let you know when we have a committee, and we'll get you there.
Okay.
And we don't care how many people you invite along with yourself. You're always good for a crowd.
Yeah.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Potter. I just want you to know that I think both of your points are very well taken, by me at least, and they're really good points, and I hope that somewhere along the line, I'm happy that we approve that ordinance, but I do hope that we take into consideration the planning department and how they are overstaffed and help them so that they can do a good job, not only for Anchorage, but for Eagle River also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you. Was there anyone else in the queue? My screen. Okay, Mr. Honeman.
Just, I want to acknowledge, again, I see Mr. Potter, he and I see each other at different community councils as well, and so I do recognize your input and your investment in our community. Well done. I'm going to challenge, Ms. Walsh is gone, and I'm not sure Mr. Thompson was here, but I really am going to need some help on trying to figure out what impact, we did in CSC and didn't go unnoticed. You brought that point up, and so we do need to find that out as soon as possible. We put a dollar figure for whatever we need to make adjustments. I'm more than willing. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hello. My name is Charles Thompson. I go by my middle name, Hans. I was here about a year ago to talk about opening the data in the Comprehensive Annual Finance Report. I currently am an admirer of the finance report and how it's how it's made, but unfortunately the way it's presented and published on the internet is in a scanned paper copy, and which makes it unavailable to extract the data from it for further analysis. And the analysis in the CAFA report consists of only 3 bar charts and a pie graph. So there really is a wealth of data within this report that is untapped And I understand that basically that it's federally mandated and it's mostly a requirement set out by the federal government, but its intended use is for public use and transparency. And although it's very transparent and the data is there, it's inaccessible. And I've talked with the finance department before about this roughly 10 months ago. And they told me that SAP will not be making this data more available for use of for the public, and that there really isn't any future plans to make this available. So I wanted to ask you, I wanted to ask the mayor if there was any possible way that we could make this data available, or sorry, more available for the public use, because I'm sure you're all aware of what's in the CAFR and the wealth of data that's in it. And I'm sure that maybe even you get bogged down with the amount of data that's in these tables, you know, just it's columns and rows of numbers that aren't represented graphically. To understand the data, we really need a better way of representing it. And I don't want to put it on the city to represent it, because that's a lot of work. But I'm sure that there's a lot of citizens like me that would like to work with it. And I think overall it would benefit all parties and people in our community to use this data for whatever advocacy reasons they have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Horniman.
I want to thank you for coming back, because I knew that you had been here before, and we were asking CFO at the time, and we were told, in fact, you may not have been here earlier or might have been listening in. I'm having difficulty tracking some expenditures, and particularly in the SAP Kronos, the ERP programs that we have. So I take your point. It's necessary. I think I'm hoping we're getting there, but I'd like to continue to stay in the discussion phase, and like you to stay in touch and on top. So my information, contact information, should be online, or see me after the meeting. We'll stay in touch.
Got it.
Thank you.
Ms. Johnston?
Yes. Have you made this same request to the school district?
No, I have not. I can, only handle so much.
Well, because the school district budget is larger and even has more different kinds of ramifications. And I'm curious, because there is a lot in the CAFR and in our finances, but I mean, there's a lot of, you can work with I've been able to work with what's in it. So what are you planning on? What more do you want? If you want information about line items, what is it you're looking for?
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. All the data that I want is available in the CAFR as it exists.
Right.
However, the format that the file is in makes it inaccessible. You'd have to enter the data manually, and that's laborsome and error-prone. There's no way to do that. And when, since we're just coming up on a new CAFR, the 2012 CAFR should be published pretty soon, all of the tables that were used to create this new CAFR are available in a digital format that would be easily disseminated online. Did that make sense?
It does to a degree. It's working data, and our accountants actually go through it. And what concerns me is if you have it online where that becomes then interactive, then
it would not be interactive. The data would be there in a format that's provided by the city.
Other than a PDF.
Other than a PDF. Say, for example, you have a paper image and you have an Excel spreadsheet. Those are two differently
And I understand the difference. I'd be curious to see what reaction you get from the school district.
Mr. Starr?
I've had communications, I think, way back, like maybe 9-10 months ago on this topic, and we sort of spoke at length, and I got reappointed as Chair of Budget and Finance again. And oftentimes I'll do, focus studies for folks, and I think maybe you had a request that you wanted to do compare and contrast for many years prior. And watching growth trends and all that's very important. So if you have something specific that you'd like us to emphasize, by all means, I'll work with you on bringing you those spreadsheets. It's not an oftentimes request. You're probably one of the few that's, in fact, the only one I know of that's ever asked for it. So in terms of accommodating the needs for the greater community, that's probably our bigger mission and responsibility. But by all means, I make a pledge to work with you on specific project items or a general topic, even somewhat specific. That's my pledge.
That's wonderful. The way I like to work with data is I like to have a large data set, and then I can perform different functions on the data set, so to look for correlations, to look for different things.
Yeah, and I guess the answer, I was trying to be as honest as I could in some of the requests that you had. Back in the day, we didn't do it that way. First off, you'd have to go back and redigitize some products that aren't that way, and then also we request reports. Basically, you hit it already with the guidelines of government accounting rules. We get them to comply with certain manners, and so we budget, we ask for a product that's delivered to us in such a format. And I guess I've not asked, and maybe I should have your expectation, but I haven't felt the need is there to ask for an alternative format. Our vendors own that product in the format. They're required to tender to us in the way we do. So some of the data sets you're talking about aren't even ours. They are Macunda Contrell's or some of the auditors that we hire, and I'm not so certain that we can bridge that. And I think that was the answer I gave you before as well. So I don't know that they're available in the way you would want them to be tendered.
I've been told by the finance department that the tables in the past have been available, but that they are in an unorganized structure so that you couldn't pull them all at once. So I'm not asking for that. I know a year ago I was asking for maybe 10 years back, and I thought that was reasonable, but that's fine. But since the data tables are available for this year, because it's being published very recently, it makes sense that if it's just a 10, 20-minute job to just output these files in a different format and put them online, then you're creating this big resource for the community that costs very little.
Thank you.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hans, it's nice to see you back, and I'm sure you remember that you and I had a meeting with the CFO last year, and I understood what her response was, although I didn't agree with it. Also, Macunda doesn't hold our files. Macunda gets the files from us to establish the CAFRA. Those files are held in-house. And I don't see anything wrong with your request. And have you talked to the CFO recently?
No, I have not.
Okay, I suggest that you bring the subject up again with her and don't give up, because I see nothing wrong with your request. And if you need my help, how to reach me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. There are no other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. I'm back. Ronald Leva. I did ask the clerk for 3 minutes, formal minutes, so I could start at 6, but hey, we're here now. I was here on the issue of the homeless shelter and Beans Cafe, lowered my assessment. I invite you all for a tour because it only gets worse and worse. And out of respect for the guard who asked me not to bring up what I think is an example what's on my property, but that will continue my bottle art, and Cristo will be proud of me, because there's over 400 bottles in that bag that came over my fence. The glass ones I tried to eliminate. Those are just the bottles. But if you come down and get a tour, that'd be great. Mr. Starr, a quick question. If you were on planning and zoning back in the day when the conditional use went to the Brother Francis shelter, are you that Mr. Starr?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and that's fine, because I listened to your speech last week or 2 weeks ago, and you did summarize your efforts, which were good in dedication, but there was a flaw in the public hearing, especially on a conditional use, because only one side gets to speak, and that's the side of the Brother Francis shelter at planning and zoning. I believe it's a non-consent agenda item, and the public doesn't get allowed to tell them that they're not a good neighbor, they're not a good provider, they're a major enabler alleviating, I think, Catholic guilt. But as far as any social service to help alleviate the problem of alleged homelessness, that does not occur. But because I offered to sell my land to the city, I'm offering a solution that Bindle Stick Park, all the campers in the city can move close to services, the Brother Francis Shelter Beans, and camp on the property that you can purchase from me. That way, the bottles that are there will be more monitoring. more, security, less what I see on a daily basis, sexual assault, deviant behavior, antisocial behavior, and I think you can control the problem of not necessarily homelessness, but what was termed when I called the East Lake. Mr. Potter, are you listening? Pay attention. They were not called end-stage chronic inebriates. They were called undesirables. And that term kind of offended me. But if you use the term undesirables, you can control this at Bindlestick Park because it's overflowing to my property, which brings me to the deterioration. Real quick summary, Mr. Hall?
Real quick.
Okay. Deteriorated property gets tax exempt. Mr. Marlowe has it on his property to revitalize an area because of what's happening with decisions from the assembly, whatever. The property's deteriorating, and I'd like to file for that exemption. But it needs a little work in section, I think it's 12.15. But willing to work, willing to offer solutions. I want out only because the NIMBY label, believe me, if you can't put a homeless shelter next to a heavy industrial lot and they become a nuisance, I'm not sure where you can put them. But I got to get out of there. And with your help, I think we can work on the solution along with Mr. Potter there. Are you still awake?
Thank you, Mr. Oliva.
Do you have any questions?
No questions.
Okay, because I did want to demonstrate by emptying these bottles out in front of you, but I think that would be no days over if it's a memory. But I do invite you all for a tour so you can see this firsthand. It's a major problem and a black eye for the city.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Anyone at all? Any assembly comments? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We're adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
See if the guard can raise.